Lausus was dead, and his weeping comrades were carrying back on his shield. A mighty warrior laid low by a mighty Mezentius had a presentiment of evil. He heard the distance and knew the truth. Then, fouling his gray dust, he raised both hands to heaven and flung himself on son's body. Was I so besotted with the pleasure of living allowed my own son to take my place under my enemies? Is the father to be saved by the wounds of the son? Have 850 died so that I might live? Now for the first time is death bitter. I have hated me owed, and I by naught shall. Wounded to me, now for the first time does a wound go deep, and even stained your name, my son, by my crimes. Men, and drove me from the throne and scepter of my fathers. I ate debt to my country and my people who detested me. Would to heaven I had paid it with this guilty life of mine. Every death a man can die. But I am still alive. I have still left the world of men and the light of day. But leave it, even as he was speaking, he was raising himself on his thigh, and slow as he was with the violence of the pain deep horsed he had in his wound, his spirit was unsubdued. He ordered his be brought. This was his glory and his comfort, and on it 860 ridden home victorious from all his wars. Seeing it pining he, Rebus, today and spoils sufferings open yours. Take mounted new javelins with it spoke to it in these words. We have lived a long time, if any mortal life is long. Either you will be victorious, carry back the head of Aeneas with the blood-stain stripped from his body, and you and I shall avenge thee of Lausus, or else, if that road is barred and no force can it, we shall fall together. I do not think, with courage like that, you will accept instructions from any other man or kindly to Trojan masters. With these words Mezentius and Rebus took on his back the weight of the rider he so well. Both his hands were laden with sharp-pointed, and on his head he wore his helmet of gleaming bronze. 870 shaggy horsehair crest. So armed, he galloped into the thick of in his battle, fierce shame, frenzy, and grief all seething together heart. 3 times he shouted the name of Aeneas. Aeneas knew his voice and offered up this joyful prayer. Let this be the will. Apollo. Now to 2 of the father of the gods. Let this be the will of high stand and fight with me. He said no more, but made 4. Mezentius with spear at the ready. Mezentius replied, that you have taken my son, you savage, you need not try frighten me. That was the only way you could have found. 880 destroy me. Death holds no terrors for us, and we give not a die. Them in thee and pivoted thought for the gods. Enough words. I have come here too. But first I have these gifts for you. He spoke and hurled a spear at his enemy, then another and another, planting Aeneas' shield as he flew round him in a great circle, but golden boss of the shield held fast. Aeneas stood there. Mezentius rode round him 3 times, hurling his spears, keeping Aeneas on his left side. 3 times the Trojan with him, turning his huge bronze shield, with its bristling forest of bronze spears. Then, weary of all the delay, weary of plucking battle, javelins out of his shield and hard-pressed in this unequal 890 Aeneas, after turning many plans over in his mind, at last burst Warhorse and forward, and threw his spear, catching Mezentius the hollow between its temples. Up it reared, thrashing the air down. First on blazed the bold Etruscan back with its hooves, and throwing its rider. Then as it came with all its weight, dislocating its shoulder, it fell head top of Mezentius, and pinned him to the ground. The sky with the shouts of Trojans and Latins as Aeneas rushed up, tearing his sword from the sheath, and crying, Where is Mezentius now? Where is that fierce spirit of his? The looked up, drinking in the bright air of heaven as he came. 900 to his senses, and replied, You are my bitter enemy. Why jeer killing? I Lausus. I ask, my fury last knowledge blood all at me, and threaten me with death? There is no sin, and did not come into battle on those terms, and my son struck no such bargain with you on my behalf. One thing, if the defeated can ask favors from their enemies, to let body be buried in the earth. I know the bitter hatred of people is all about me. Protect me, I beg you, from there, and let me lie in the grave with my son." These were his words. He then took the sword in the throat with full, and poured out his life's breath in wave upon wave of over his armor. Book 11. Drances and Camilla. Ocean, burying deaths at. Cutting all trophy shining leader of. Meanwhile the goddess of the dawn had risen from, and anxious and eager as Aeneas was to give time to his comrades. Distraught as he was in mind at their first light, the victor was paying his vows to the gods. The branches off a huge oak, he set it up on a mound, as a to the great god mighty in war, and clothed it in the armor he had stripped from the body of the enemy. Mezentius. There he set the hero's crest dripping its dew. 10 blood. The broken spears and the breastplate struck and pierced through in 12 places. On the left he bound the bronze shield, and from the neck he hung the ivoried sword. He then addressed close them work is his comrades, for all the Trojan leaders were pressing around him. And these were the words he spoke to urge on in their hour of triumph. "The greatest part of our done, my friends. In what remains there is nothing to fear. These are spoils I have taken from a proud king, the first fruits of this place. Walls and hesitate war. This is Mezentius, and my hands have set him in this our way now lies towards the king of the Latins and the of their city. Make ready your weapons. Fill your minds your hopes with the thought of war, so that no man shall 20 or not know what to do when the gods permit us to pull up our standards and lead the army out of camp. When that time comes, there must be no faint-heartedness or sluggishness thoughts to slow us down. In the meanwhile, let us consign to thee and have shed sent who us and own unburied bodies of our comrades to the earth, for that is only honor a man has in the underworld. Go, he said, grace these noble spirits with their last rites, for they their blood to win this land for us. But first let Pallas be back to the stricken city of Evander. This was a warrior did not fail in courage when his black day took him from drowned him in the bitterness of death. So he spoke, weeping, and made his way back to his 30 threshold where the body of Pallas lay guarded by old Aeneid. Evander was them. Trojans mourning entered his. Aeneid had once been the armor-bearer of Arcadian, but the auspices were no longer so favorable when he appointed as companion to his dear ward, Pallas. About stood the whole throng of their attendants, and all the and the women of Troy with their hair unbound in, after the manner of their people. But when Aeneas' high doorway, they beat their breasts and raised their lament to the sky till the palace rang with the sound of 40 grief. When he himself saw the head of Pallas cushioned their smooth-spoke smiles, would not triumph Evander forsent me, and his white face, and the open wound torn in that breast by the Italian spear, the tears welled up, and he these words. Oh, the pity of it! Fortune came to me with, but took you from me while you were still a boy, and let you live to see us in our kingdom, or to ride back into your father's house. This is not what I promised his son, when he took me in his arms as I left him, and out to take up this great command, warning me with fear in his heart that these were fierce warriors, that this was a hardy race. 50 I had to meet in battle. Even now, deluded by vain hopes, he while warrior what how we is this may be making vows and heaping altars with offerings, we bring him with tears and useless honors a young who owes no more debts to any heavenly power. With eyes will you look at the dead body of your son? Is this return from war? Are these the triumphs expected of us? My great pledge? But you will not see a wound on him. Evander, father who the your loss, of which you need to be ashamed. You will not be has the terrible wish that his son who is alive were dead. Land of Italy has lost a great bulwark, and great too is. Iulus. 60 After he had his fill of weeping, he ordered them to take up 1,000 tears, but not shoots where straw. The pitiable corpse, and from the whole army he sent a chosen men as escort to pay a last tribute, and join there with those of Evander. A small comfort for a great sorrow, a debt that was owed to the stricken father. Others were slow to weave a soft wickerwork bier of arbutus and oak to make a raised couch. Shaded by a canopy of green, they laid the young warrior high on his bed of country. There he lay like a flower cut by the thumbnail of a young girl. 70 a soft violet or drooping lily, still with its sheen and its shape, strength. And for though Mother Earth no longer feeds it and gives it, then Aeneas brought out 2 robes stiffened with gold-purple threads, which Cynean Dido had long since made him with her own hands, picking out the warp in fine gold, and in the end of the work had been a joy to her. With grief in his heart, he one of these on the young man's body as his last tribute. A fold of it, he veiled the hair that would soon be burned. Then he gathered a great heap of spoil from the battle on Laurentine fields, and ordered it to be brought to the pyre. 80-long procession, adding to it the horses and weapons he had hands, he the blood army weapons names, taken from the enemy. Then came the captives, whose had bound behind their backs, to send them as offerings to shades of the dead, and sprinkle the funeral pyre with the of their sacrifice. He also commanded the leaders of the to carry in their own arms tree trunks draped with captured from the enemy, and inscribed with their hated. Acoetes, worn out with age, was led along in the procession, with ground, beating his breast with clenched fists and tearing his face's nails, but he collapsed, and lay all his length on the chariots were drawn along drenched with Rutulian blood, and then came Pallas' warhorse Ethon, stripped of all its trappings. 90 with the tears rolling down in great drops, and soaking its face. Victorious followed, all their arms. Pallas had. There were men to carry his spear and his helmet. The Turnus had the rest. A great phalanx of mourners, the Trojans and the Etruscans and the Arcadians with reversed. After this procession of all the comrades of a deep war calls great into marched well clear of the camp, Aeneas halted, and with groan he spoke these words: the same grim destiny of us away from here, to weep other tears. Forever hail, Pallas, and farewell forever. He said no more, but set off towards his high-built fortifications and marched back camp. 100, and now envoys appeared from the city of the Latins bearing. The steel had let quarrel, he hosts refused this olive branches wreathed in wool, and asking for a truce. Bodies of their dead were all over the plain where they laid them, and they begged Aeneas to give them back and them go to their graves in the earth, for he could have no with men who were defeated and had lost the light of life. Must show mercy to those who had once been called his, and the kinsmen of his bride. Good Aeneas could not petition. He honored the envoys, granted what they asked in Latium. From us, added these words: what cruel fortune is this? Men of that has embroiled you in war and made you run away. 110 who are your friends? You ask me for peace for the dead, whose been nor offered your friendship is not. If it is armed, these God or in light destiny has been to die in battle. I for my part would have willing to grant them peace when they were still alive. Would I ever have come to this land if the fates had not me a place here to be my home? I do not wage war with people. It was your king who abandoned our sworn and preferred to put his trust in the weapons of Turnus. It these men who should have risked their lives, but Turnus. His plan to put an end to this war by the strength of his and drive out the Trojans. He should have faced me and weapons of mine in battle. One of us would have lived. Our own right hands would have seen to that. Go now. 120 fires beneath the bodies of your unfortunate citizens. Aeneas, each had spoken. They were astonished and stood looking at other in silence. Young is what first shall we fortune? Latinus. Then Drances, an older man who had always hated the warrior Turnus and spoken against him, began to make reply. O Trojan, great in fame, and greater still in arms, words of mine could raise you to the skies. What shall I praise, your justice or your labors in war? Gratefully carry these words of yours back to our native city, and if shows us a way, we shall reconcile you to our king. 130 Turnus can make his own treaties. We shall do more. We shall you in delight to raise the massive walls fate has decreed for lift up the building stones of Troy on our shoulders. All to a man they murmured in agreement when he had finished speaking. 12 days they decided on, and during that Latins know man and time, with peace as mediator between them, Trojans and were together in the hills and wandered the woods, and harmed another. The iron axe rang upon tall ash trees from wedges brought down skyward thrusting pines. They never rested their labors, splitting the oak and fragrant cedar with, and carrying down the ash trees on carts from the mountains. 140, but rumor was already on the wing, overwhelming Evander of Latium, torches long side, joined the saw there into thee and the house and city of Evander with the first warning's anguish. The talk was no longer of Pallas. Conqueror of the Arcadians rushed to the gates, snatching up funeral according to their ancient practice. The road was lit by a line of flames which showed up the fields far on either. Nearer and nearer came the throng of Trojans till it columns of mourners. When the mothers of Pallanteum them entering the walls, the stricken city was ablaze with cries. No power on earth could restrain Evander, coming the middle of the throng where the bier had been laid on. 150 ground. He threw himself on the body of Pallas and clung to it weeping and moaning until at last grief freed a path for his voice. O Pallas, this is not what you promised your father. You cruel arms, bitter in war, said you would not be too rash in trusting yourself to the god of war. I well knew the glory of one's first success and the joy above all other joys of one's first battle. These are first fruits for a young man. A hard schooling it has been. Listen, see, and you did not have far to go for it. None of the gods to my vows and prayers. O my dear wife, most blessed of women, you were fortunate in your death, in not living to 160 this day, but I have outstayed my time. A father should not into spears. If bringing wish to joining of debt, I his survive his son. If only I had followed our Trojan allies' battle, and the Rutulians had buried me under their only, I had given up my own life, and this procession was home my body, and not the body of Pallas. I would not blame you, Trojans, nor our treaties, nor regret our right hands in friendship. The death of my son was fated to pay in my old age. But if an early death was destiny, I shall rejoice to think that first he killed thousands of Volscians and fell while leading the Trojans into Latium. Nor given you would I wish you any other funeral than this, Pallas. 170 by good Aeneas and the great men from Phrygia, the leaders of great deaths. Fields, of the Etruscans and all the soldiers of Etruria, bearing the trophies of the warriors your right hand has sent to there, and you too, Turnus, would now be standing in the huge headless trophy, had Pallas been your equal in age, had grief charged to now arm. Father, and you're the years given you both equal strength. But why does my keep the Trojans from their arms? Go now, take this your king, and do not forget it. If I drag out my hated life that Pallas is killed, the reason, Aeneas, lies in your right. You know it owes the life of Turnus to the sun, and to this is the one field where you must put your courage. 180 fortune to the test. I seek no joy in life. That is not what my son miserable Tarshan after the torches to pitchy gods have willed, only to take this satisfaction down to among the dead. Aurora meanwhile had lifted up her life-giving light for mortals, bringing back their toil and sufferings. Both and Father Aeneas soon built funeral pyres on the curving shore and carried there the bodies of their dead, each fashion of their fathers. They then set black burning the fires, and the heights of heaven were plunged into 190 darkness. 3 times they ran round the blazing pyres in gleaming round upon armor. 3 times they rode in solemn procession the fires of the dead, with wails of lamentation. Tears fell clamor of through their scorching their armor, and fell upon the earth beneath. The men and the clangor of trumpets rose to heaven as some into the flames spoils torn from the corpses of the Latins, splendid swords and helmets, the bridles of horses and chariot wheels, while others burned the familiar possessions of their dead friends, the shields and spears which fortune had not bodies flocks. All blessed, all around, oxen were being sacrificed and they're offered to the god of death, while bristling swine, and carried off from the fields were slaughtered over the fires. 200 along the shore they watched the bodies of their comrades burn away till studded to the they jumbled upon and tended the dying flames. Nor would they be torn dank night, turned over the heavens, and showed a sky with burning stars. The morning Latins, too, had built countless pyres some distance apart from the Trojans. Many bodies of men they buried in the earth. Many they took up and carried back city or to their homes nearby in the countryside. The rest burned uncounted and unhonored. A huge pile of corpses, and all the wide land on every side was lit by fire. 210 fire, each brighter than the other. When the third day had risen, leveled were earth, famous for their and beating, cursing who shield Italy and dispersed the chilled darkness of the sky. The mourners on the pyres, the deep ash in which the bones of the dead mingled, and weighed it down with mounds of warm that day in their homes in the city of King Latinus. His wealth, the noise of grief was at its loudest. That day long mourning reached its height. Here were the mothers, heartbroken wives of the dead. Here were loving sisters, their breasts, and children who had lost their fathers. All this deadly war and Turnus marriage. He was the man should be deciding this matter with his own sword, and since he was the man who was claiming the kingdom of 220 and the highest honors for himself, the bitter Drances heaped whose fight, and cast fuel on the fire, and swore that Turnus was the only man name was being called. Nobody else was being asked to, but at the same time many voices were raised for Turnus. Much was said on his behalf. The great name of the queen, its protecting shadow, and also in his favor was all the fame still with he achieved there, and all the trophies he had won in his wars. In the middle of this disturbance, while the dispute was raging, to crown all, the envoys suddenly arrived back, gloomy answer from the city of Diomed. They had nothing for all the efforts they had expended, their gifts. 230 gold, their earnest prayers had failed, the Latins would have to the heart. Express telling before great within they those sadness look elsewhere for reinforcements, or plead for peace with Trojan king. At this bitter blow, even King Latinus lost. Aeneas was chosen by fate, and brought there by the will of heaven. This was what the anger of the gods was them. This was the message of these tombs newly raised their eyes. With such thoughts in mind, he summoned a council, commanding the leaders of his people to come his lofty doors. They duly gathered, filling the streets as streamed to the royal palace. Greatest in age and first of who carried the scepter, Latinus sat in the middle with 240 on his brow, and asked the envoys who had returned from the city of the Aetolians to tell what reply they brought, demanding called to speak. Camp. Chances down to hear every detail in due order. The assembly was silence. Vinulus obeyed the command and began to. Fellow citizens, we have seen Diomed and the Argive. We have paced out the road and lived through all of the journey. We have touched the hand that brought the land of Ilium. There in the fields near Mount Garganus, and was fathers given leave the Apulian kingdom of Iapix, the victorious Diomed founding his city called Argyripa after the home of his at Argos. After we were admitted to his presence and to speak, we offered our gifts, telling him our names and the 250 land from which we came, who had brought war among us, and reply are the fortune is war's what had taken us to Arpi. He heard us out, and made this in words of peace. The peoples of your land are blessed by fortune, yours kingdoms of Saturn, the ancient Ausonians. But what if that disturbs your peace, and persuades you to stir up you do not understand? Those of us whose swords violated the fields of Ilium. Let me not speak of all we endured as we fought. Samois, unspeakable beneath her walls, or of our men drowned in her river. We are scattered over the round earth, paying penalties and suffering all manner of punishment for our crimes. We are a band of men that even Priam might pity. The deadly 260 star of Minerva knows us well. So do the rocks of Euboea, and we have of Caphareus, the Cape of Vengeance. From that campaign been washed up on many a different shore. Menelaus' son Atreus is in exile in distant Egypt at the pillars of Proteus. Ulysses' kingdom of has seen the Cyclopes on Etna. Shall I speak of thee in the by his own to the Neoptolemus and Epirus? Of the new home of Idomeneus Calabria? Of Locrians living on the shores of Libya? Even leader of the great Achivi from Mycenae was struck down the hand of his evil queen the moment he stepped over threshold. The adulterous lover had been waiting for Asia fall. To think that the envious gods forbade me to return. 270 altars of my fathers, or to see the wife I longed for in my beautiful homeland of Caledon. Even now I am pursued by the sight of hideous portents. My lost comrades have taken to rivers, so rocks madness defiled bound to any the sky on wings. They have become birds and haunt the cruelly have my people been punished, weeping till the ring with the sound of their voices. From that moment of when I attacked the body of a goddess and my spear the hand of Venus, I should have known that this was come. Do not, I beg you, do not urge me to take part in such battle. I have had no quarrel with the Trojans since. 280 uprooting of their citadel of Pergamum, and I do not remember you closed in behind land of have all the hands noble old wrongs, or take any pleasure in them. As for the gifts bring me from your country, give them rather to Aeneas. Have faced each other, spear against deadly spear, in battle. Believe me, for I have known it, how huge he rises his shield, with what a whir he spins his javelin. If the Ilium had borne 2 other such heroes, the Trojan would come in war to the cities of the Greek. The fates would change and Greece would now be in mourning. As for long delay before the stubborn walls of Troy, it was the of Hector and Aeneas, both men noble in their courage. 290 in their skill in arms, but Aeneas the greater in piety, that held to the clash. You was when, in the back the victory of the Greeks, and did not let it come till 10th year. Let your hands join in a treaty of peace while chance is offered, but take care not to let your weapons on his. You have heard, O best of kings, the answer of a king, have heard his judgment on this great war. The envoys had scarcely finished before a confused roar running through the troubled ranks of the Italians, as rocks resist a river in spate, and the trapped waters eddy growl, while the banks on either side roar with the din of 300 waves. As soon as calm returned to their minds, and the words thrown of better so, of fear were stilled on their lips, the king on his high addressed the gods, and then began. For my part, O men Latium, I would have wished, and it would have been to have decided this great issue long since, and not be summoning a council at a time like this with the enemy sitting by our walls. We are fighting a misguided war, fellow citizens, against not unconquerable heroes and the sons of gods. Battle does hands. Aetolians, but you weary them, and even in defeat they cannot take there from the sword. If you had any hope of recruiting thee as your allies, lay it aside. To everyone his own hopes. 310 can see how feeble this one is. All other resources shattered. The courage for doubting words, which here stony and lies in ruins. You can see this with your own eyes. Whole truth is there at your fingertips. I accuse no one. Has done all that courage could do. The whole body of kingdom has fought this fight. But now the time has come me to express an opinion which has formed in my mind. Give me your attention, and I shall tell it in a few near the Tuscan river Tiber. I have long owned some land stretches away to the west beyond the land of the Sicani. Auruncans and Rutulians sow their seeds, wearying thee. 320 hills with the plow and grazing the roughest of them. Let this whole area with the pine forest clothing its high mountains be us partners set given to the Trojans as a token of our friendship, and let propose a treaty in just terms, inviting them to become in our kingdom. Let them settle here, if their hearts are so elsewhere their timbers of them, that they dockyards on it, and build their walls. But if it is their wish to go and seize the land of some other nation, and if it is within power to leave this country of ours, let us weave the 20 ships in Italian oak, or more if they can man what is all lying on the shore. Let them say what ships want and how many, and we can provide the bronze, the 330 in the hands to do the work. I propose also that 100 envoys, men of the highest rank in the Latin race, be holding out talents of emblems sent to carry this message and conclude this treaty, the branches of peace in their hands and bearing gifts, gold and ivory, and the throne and robe which are the askance still with had of our royal power. Consider this together, and rescue our crippled fortunes." Then rose Drances, hostile as ever, who always looked at Turnus' great reputation and was goaded by bitter jealousy. He was generous with his wealth and readier his tongue, but his hand did not warm to battle. His voice, 340 some weight in council, and was always a force for discord. His origin's mother's breeding gave him pride of rank. His fathers were unknown. These were the words he spoke to add force kings support fortunate. It blow of his he draw many in substance to their anger. What you propose, good Latinus, is clear to all and needs no words of mine to it. Everyone knows, and admits that he knows, what has in store for the people, but they are all afraid to utter is time for the man whose auspices the gods reject to little less hard and give us freedom to speak. It is because fatal recklessness. I, for one, shall not be silent though his sword and threaten me with death. We have seen so of our leaders, who have been the lights of our people, extinguished. 350 and the whole of our city now slumped in grief, while he storms the Trojan camp and frightens the sky with his weapons. There those be able knowing he can save his own life by taking to his heels. Is still one thing you must add, O best of kings, to all many proposals and gifts you tell us to send to the sons of Dardanus. One thing only, and no man's violence should to overrule your right as a father to give your own daughter to a noble husband in a marriage that will be worthy of her, sealing this peace in a treaty for all time. But if our hearts and minds are so beset with fear of the man, let us beg and beseech him to give her up and restore to his king and to his fatherland 360 rights which are their due. Why do you keep throwing your unfortunate fellow citizens into the jaws of danger? Turnus, you of peace, to who are the single source and cause of all these sufferings Latium. War will never save us. We are all asking you for, and the one inviolable pledge of that peace. I am the first come to you as a suppliant. You imagine I am your enemy, and your must have seen, but if heart. If then that causes me no distress, look at me. I beg you to pity people and lay down your pride. You are defeated. You leave the field. We have been routed often enough and enough funerals. We have stripped our wide fields bare. Fame drives you on. If you have the strength in you have such a yearning to receive a palace as a dowry. 370 Be bold. Have the confidence to go and stand face to face with our fields, strength in your enemy. So that Turnus can get himself a royal bride, lives are cheap. We, the rank and file, are to litter the unburied and unwept. But you too, if there is any you, if you have any of the fighting spirit of your fathers, stand rage. Always action. Up to your challenger and look him in the face. At this, Turnus groaned, and blazed up into a violent the words burst from the depths of his heart. You have a good supply of words, Drances, when war calls for. 380 When the Senate is summoned, you are the first to appear. But for walls and waiting you can accuse me many with, and this is no time for filling the council chamber with talk, pouring out high-flown speeches in comfort, while our ramparts are all that keep the enemy from us, and we are for the ditches to fill with blood. By all means, Drances, thunder out your eloquence in your usual style and of cowardice, when your right hand has heaped up as Trojan corpses as mine has, and all the fields are studded your trophies. But now is our chance to test our vigor are them. Be in valor. We do not have to look too far for enemies, they standing all round the walls. Shall we advance to meet? You hesitate? Where is your martial spirit? Will it always? 390 Your long tongue and nimble feet? You say I have been defeated. He sees of stripped found day. You scum of the earth, who can say I am defeated when the Thybris rising, swollen with Trojan blood, the house of Vander destroyed root and branch, and the Arcadians of their arms? This is not how great Pandarus ambitious me, nor the 1,000 men I sent down to Tartarus on my victory when I was trapped inside the walls and rampart of the enemy. You say that war will never save us. That prophecy. 400 is for the Trojan and for yourself, you fool. But go on, stirring up panic everywhere and praising to the skies the strength of a race of men who have been twice defeated. Go on insulting the armies of Latinus. Now, it seems, the leaders of the Myrmidons are afraid of Phrygian weapons. Now it seems that Diomed Aufidus is Adriatic. Rogues against will welcome, and Achilles of Larissa are taking fright, and the river flowing backwards in full retreat from the waves of the Drances even pretends to be terrified when I speak. A trick. The fear is a pretense to add sting to his charges me. But there is no need for you to be alarmed. My hand never take the breath of life from a man like you. It is to stay where it is in that breast of yours. 410. But now, Father, I come to you and to your great plan. If you no longer hold out any hope for our arms, if we are left to fight on utterly alone, if after one setback we are completely destroyed, and fortune has abandoned us never to return, let us only stretch out our defenseless arms and sue for peace. But if who see the resources there were a spark of our old courage left in us. Any man has fallen and bitten the dust of death rather than live to such a thing. I count him fortunate in his life's labors, noblest spirit amongst us. Surely we still have untapped and warriors who have not yet engaged, and there are 420 still cities and peoples in Italy to help us. And surely the Trojans won. Fallen on here passing fortune, said his city have paid a heavy price in blood for the glory they too have had their funerals. The same storm has all of us. Why then do we disgrace ourselves by stumbling the threshold? Why do our knees start shaking before we the trumpet? Many things change for the better with the of the days, and the ever-varying workings of time. Comes and goes. She has mocked many a man, and then feet back on solid ground. So the Aetolian Diomed and of Arpe will not help us, but Messapus will, and Tolumnius. For 30 blessed by the gods, and all the leaders who have come to us chosen from so many peoples. And great will be the glory for the men of Latium and the Laurentine fields. We have Camilla too, from the noble Volscian race, leading her mounted column and her squadrons flowering with bronze. But if I am the only one I am of disposed the Trojans want to meet in battle, if that is your will, and such a great obstacle to the good of all, then the goddess Victory has not entirely abandoned me, nor is she so ill to these hands of mine that I should refuse any undertaking for which I have such hopes. I shall go and face him with my spirits. For 40 high were he mightier than Achilles, and with armor the equal you, and courage to my challenge. God's courage army. The Trojans, of his, made like his by the hands of Vulcan. To all of Latinus, father of my bride, I, Turnus, second in none of those who have gone before me, have offered up life. Is Aeneas challenging me, and me alone? Let him, it is the answer to my prayer. If this is the anger of the wood, not have Drances appease it. If it is a moment for in glory, I would not give it to Drances. So they disputed among themselves in deep uncertainty. Aeneas, meanwhile, had struck camp and was moving his. Suddenly there came a messenger rushing wildly through royal palace and causing panic all over the city. The 450 drawn up in line of battle, the Etruscan squadron with them, whole people wild shouted, great sound of whose. Pedusa, shouted were coming down the valley of the Tiber and filling the plain. There was instant confusion and dismay among thee, and hearts were roused by the sharp spur of anger. With gestures the young men asked for arms. Arms, they while their fathers wept and murmured. On every side a clamor of dissenting voices rose to the winds like the flocks of birds settling in groves of tall trees, or swans' harsh calls ring across the chattering pools of the river, so rich in fish. Do not disturb yourselves, citizens. For 60 Turnus, seizing the moment, convene your council and sit there with them as he praising peace while your enemies invade your kingdoms, swords in their hands. These were his only words to leap to his feet and rushed from the lofty palace shouting, You, Volusus, tell the Volscian contingents to arm, and take the you whole and man. Rutulians with you. Deploy the cavalry, Messapus, and 2 Chorus with your brother, in battle array over the plain. Some of you reinforce the approaches to the city where either the towers. The rest of you come and advance with me order. In an instant they poured on to the walls from all over. 470 City. Father Latinus himself left the council and abandoned his troubles of eagerly his the high designs till a later time, in deep distress at the hour. Again and again he blamed himself for not welcoming Trojan Aeneas and taking him into the city as son-in-law. Meanwhile men were digging pits in front of blue May gates and bringing up rocks and stakes. The shrill trumpet the signal for bloody battle, and mothers and sons went to a motley ring round the walls of the city. Their last labor called them, and they came. The queen, too, with a great retinue of the went the mothers of the city, rode in her carriage to bring offerings temple of Pallas on the heights of the citadel. With her, 480 maiden Lavinia, the cause of all this suffering, her lovely eyes temple from Tritonian downcast. The mothers followed them and filled with the smoke of incense, pouring out their sad prayers its high threshold. Mighty in arms, ruler of the battle, pirate maiden, break with your hand the spear of the Phrygian and throw him to the ground. Spread out his body beneath your high gates. Turnus in a fury was eagerly arming himself for bristling still bare battle, and soon had on his breastplate glowing red with scales of bronze, and his golden greaves. His head was for 90, but the sword was girt to his side as he ran down from the heights of the citadel in a blaze of gold, ardent and exulting, and already grappling with the enemy in hope and expectation. He from his fields bathe in head his was like a stallion that has broken his tether and burst stall. Free at last he gains the open plain, and runs to the where the herds of Mares are pastured, or gallops off to the river which he used to know so well, tossing high his and whinnying with delight, while the mane streams over neck and flanks. The Princess Camilla came to meet him with her Volscians in battle order. Under the very gates of the city she leapt down. 500 from her horse, and all her squadron followed her example, words, dismounting in one flowing movement. These were her, Turnus, if the brave are right to have faith in themselves. I dare go try thee and cannot to meet the Trojan cavalry. This is my undertaking, and alone against the horsemen of Etruria. Give me leave to first hazard of war, while you stay on foot by the walls guard the city. At these words Turnus fixed his eyes on this formidable warrior maiden and replied, O Camilla, glory of Italy, I 510 hope to express my gratitude in words or deeds. But now, since the brought cavalry the city, that spirit of yours knows no limits, come share with me heat of battle. According to a firm report my scouts have me, that scoundrel Aeneas has sent his light-armed ahead to scour the plains, while he himself is coming to along a ridge in deserted mountain country. I am planning in, and shall leaves to them. Latium ambush where there is a sunken path through a wood, post armed men where the road enters, and where it gorge. You go to meet the Etruscan cavalry, and engage bold Messapus will be with you with the horsemen of and the squadron of Tiburtus, and you will have the task of 520 leading them. So he spoke, and with like words urged Messapus meet stratagem dense known and the leaders of his allies into battle, while he went to his enemy. There is a winding valley well suited to stealth and in war, hemmed in on both sides. It is darkened by the foliage of trees, and a narrow path leads into it, making a treacherous approach through a ravine. Above this valley, among the viewpoints on the hilltop, there lies a little plateau which gives safe cover whether you wish to engage the enemy on your right flank or on your left, or stand on the 530 ridges rolling down great boulders. Marching by paths he knew, this of girls above all nothing, the heart. Turnus took up position here and settled into ambush in dangerous forest. Meanwhile in the palace of the heavens Diana, daughter Latona, spoke to swift Opus, one of the sacred company of who were her companions, and these were her sad words. Camilla is going to a cruel war. Dear as she is to me others, she has put on our armor, and it will avail her. This is no new love, believe me, that has come to move. 540 of Diana with sudden sweetness. When Metabus, hated by his people for his arrogant use of power, was driven from his throne, he left the ancient city of Pravernum and took his infant daughter companion mothers with him through all his wars and battles, to be his in exile. He called her Camilla, changing part of her long heart on him. Name, Casmilla. Carrying her in his arms, he made for the ridges and the lonely woods, cruel spears pressing him every side and Volscian soldiers on the move all about. Suddenly, he found his way blocked by the river. Amasenus in full spate, foaming to the top of its banks, such a deluge of rain water had burst from the clouds. He was about to leap into the 550 to swim across, but checked himself out of love for his child and dangers. Warriors of baby and middle of cried out daughter, she is fear for the burden he so loved. As he pondered all a painful resolve soon formed in his mind. He took the spear he chanced to have in his hand, a mighty weapon solid, knotted, well-seasoned wood, and wrapping the cork tree pith and bark, he lashed her tightly to the spear. Then brandishing it in his mighty hand, he to heaven. To you, kindly maiden, lover of woods and of Latona, I dedicate my daughter as your handmaiden, your suppliant, and as she flies through the air to escape her 560 enemies, the first weapon she holds is yours. O goddess, I solemnly pray, receive her as your own as I now commit her to his arms. Sound whistling pressing then, spear walls, but he the hazard of the winds. At these words he drew back and sent the weapon spinning. The waters rang with the as helpless Camilla flew over the wild river on the javelin. But by now a great throng of his enemies was Metabus even closer, and he threw himself into the water. In triumph on the other side, he wrenched from the turf and the maiden with it, his dedication to Diana. No cities took him under their roofs, or within there he himself was too savage to have submitted to them. 570 spent his whole life on the lonely mountains among the herdsmen. Mares, taken javelin in shoulder. A tiger. There in the scrub among the rough dens of beasts he fed his daughter with milk from the udders of wild brood, putting the teats to her soft lips. And as soon as she had the first steps on her infant feet, he put a keen-edged her hand, and slung a bow and arrows from her little instead of gold in her hair, and a long cloak to cover her. Skin hung from her head, all down her back. While her hand was still soft, she was spinning her baby javelins and whirling the 580 sling round her head on its tapering thong to shoot the white the sun, as she had challenged have fate nymph, being swan or crane from the river Strymon. Many a mother in towns of Etruria longed in vain to see her married to her, but all she cared for was Diana. Undefiled, she preserved constant love for her weapons and her chastity. If only never been caught up in such a war as this, daring to the Trojans, I would have loved her, and she would now been one of my companions. But come now, since a bitter is closing in on her, glide down from the sky, Opus Mai, and visit the land of Latium, where a dreadful battle is. 590 fought, and all the omens are adverse. Take these weapons, and same be he blood. Armor country, draw an avenging arrow from my quiver. Then, with that shaft, whoever violates that sacred body with a wound, Trojan or Italian, must pay to me an equal penalty, and then I shall put a cloud round her poor body and her, and take them undespoiled to lie in a tomb in her own. The goddess spoke, and Opus, veiled in a dark storm, glided she cavalry lightly down through the breezes of the sky, whirring as flew. But all this time nearer and nearer to the walls came the Trojan column, the Etruscan leaders, and the whole 600 army drawn up in regular squadrons. Horses were prancing and snorting all over the plain, fretting at the reins that held them, and field ablaze oppose his were quivering. Plain was other forward, and plunging to one side after another. Far and wide the bristled with the steel of the spears, and all the land was of light from uplifted weapons. There too, coming to them, appeared Messapus and the swift Latins, chorus with brother, and the squadron of Camilla. Their right arms drawn back, their lances thrust forward with tips. Men were arriving. Horses were neighing. The whole ablaze. They had now come within a spear cast of each and stopped. Then, with a sudden shout, they galloped. 610 urging their horses to frenzy, and showering weapons thick as enforced snow till the sky was curtained with shadow. Tyrrhenus bold Acontius were first to charge each other, riding full fall smashing distance catapult, disorder, and with leveled spears, and great was the din and fearful the as they crashed their war horses against each other, breast on breast. Acontius was thrown forward a great, and fell like a thunderbolt, or a rock hurled from a scattering his life's breath into the breezes. In that instant the battle lines were thrown into putting their shields onto their backs. The Latins turned. 620 rode back towards the city walls driven by the Trojan squadrons. They raised horses, reins and rushing under Asilas. But when they were almost at the gates, another shout and pulled round the supple necks of their, while the Trojans fled in their turn, galloping with slack a long retreat. As the sea advances wave by wave, now edge sucking while city walls, to the land, throwing foam over the rocks and soaking the of the sand in the bay, now turning and hurrying back, down the stones and rolling them along in its undertow the shallows retreat, and the shore is left dry. Just so the Etruscans twice turned and drove the Rutulians to the 630, and twice they were repulsed, and had to cover their backs with their shields and look over their shoulders at their enemies. But when they clashed in battle for the third time, and all the ranks enemy, about fiercer, but under its high and wound, were embroiled together, each man singled out his own, and then the groans of the dying could be heard. Weapons and bodies lay deep in blood, half-dead horses rolled entangled with the corpses of men, and ever fiercer and grew the battle. Orsilochus did not dare go near Remulus, hurled his spear at his horse, and its steel point stuck ear. Maddened by the blow, it reared, heaving its chest, lashing its hooves, unable to endure the pain of the 640. Remulus was thrown and sent rolling on the ground, Catulus' spirit, and bare, to the through and felled Iolaus, and then Herminius, great in stature and in arms. His head of golden hair was bare, his shoulder, and he had no fear of wounds, so vast he stood, and open weapons of his enemies. Catulus' spear drove right him, and stood out between his broad shoulders quivering. Herminius doubled up in agony. Black blood was flowing everywhere as they dealt out slaughter with the steel, searching for death and glory among the wounds. Was one. There in the middle of all this bloodshed, exulting in it, the Amazon Camilla with the quiver on her shoulder, and 650 side bared for battle. Sometimes the pliant spears came thick mighty on turned girl Shitula, daughters her from her hand. Sometimes, unwearied, she caught up her double axe, and the golden bow and arrows of Diana rang her shoulder. Whenever she was forced to retreat, she her bow and aimed her arrows while still in flight. The had chosen as her companions were all about her, Larina, and Tarpeia brandishing her bronze axe, all of them of Italy, chosen by the servant of the gods Camilla to do honor by their beauty and to be her own trusted attendants in peace and war. They were like the Amazons of Thrace whose 660 horses' hooves drum on the frozen waters of the river Thermodon colored home in shields, whom when they fight round Hippolyte in their brightly armor, or when Penthesilea, daughter of Mars, rides her chariot and her army of women with their crescent exult in a great howling tumult. Whom first did your spear bring down from his horse? Men did the first, the long vomited teeth, last, fierce warrior maiden? How many bodies of dying you strew on the ground? Aeneas, son of Clitius, was when he stood face to face with Camilla, and she drove pine shaft of her spear through his unprotected chest. He rivers of blood, and champed the gory earth with his 670, twisting himself round his wound as he died. Then she brought trying and down Liris and Pagasus on top of him. Liris when he was to collect the reins after his wounded horse had reared thrown him. Pagasus when he came and stretched out an undefended right hand to support Liris as he fell. But they both went flying head over heels. Then she sent Amastris, the son of Harpalycus, long her hand, past in warrior, Hippotas, to join them, and raced after Tyrus and Demophoon and Chromis, pressing them hard even at range with her spear, and for every dart that flew from a Trojan hero fell. The huntsman Aeneid was rushing strange armor, mounted on his horse Iapix. This was a 680 who wore on his broad shoulders the hide of a bullock, while his head was encased in the huge, gaping jaws of a wolf, complete with cheekbones and white teeth. A country spear shaped like press, not when a sickle armed his hand as he moved in the middle of the taller by a head than them all. She caught him. It was difficult, for the whole column had turned and run, and she had pierced him through. She spoke these bitter taunts over woods, "My proved you will to him. So you thought you were driving game in the Etruscan friend? The day has come when you have been wronged by a woman's weapons. But it is no mean name be taking to your fathers when you tell them you fell by spear of Camilla." 690 instantly, then she struck Orsilochus and Beauties, the two tallest tip of his hanging he had began to again of the Trojans. Beauties was turned away from her, and her spear went in between helmet and breastplate, where neck shone white as he sat in the saddle with the shield loose on his left arm. She fled from Orsilochus, but after driven her in a great circle, she cut inside the arc and pursued her pursuer. Then, rising above him, she struck in again with her mighty axe, hacking through his armor and his bones as he begged and pleaded with her, and the axe blows. 700 spilt the hot brains down his face. The warrior son of Onuzov. Ligurians he saw that began, "What courage risk you're the Apennines," then came upon her, and stood stock still in sudden terror at the sight. He was not the least of the while the fates gave him leave to tell his lies. So, when that it was too late to save himself by running away, and the princess was upon him and would not be deflected, he to play his tricks, using all his cunning and calculation. "Is so wonderful," he said, "if a woman depends on thee of a horse. Give up your chance of running away, and life in close combat with me on level ground. Gird yourself to fight on foot, and you will soon discover that the winds are blowing you only the illusion of glory." These words stung 710 Camilla to a burning fury of resentment. Handing her horse to have plain light thee around, he you a companion, she stood there to face him without a trace fear, armed like her enemy with a naked sword and a shield. The moment he thought his ruse had succeeded, warrior took to his heels himself. Jerking the reins made off, driving his horse to the gallop with steel spurs. "Ligurian fool," she cried, "you are the one who has been carried you away by the empty winds of pride. You have taken to the slippery arts of your ancestors, but little good will they do. Trickery will not bring you safe back home to your treacherous father Onus." These were her words, and on nimble feet she its path, ran as swift as fire in front of the horse, and stood full in. 720 then, seizing the reins, she exacted punishment from her enemy, to rips out feathers he Tarshan of in blood, as easily as the sacred falcon flies from his crag pursue a dove high in the clouds, catches it, holds it, and its entrails with hooked claws while blood and torn float down from the sky. But the Father of gods and men was not blind to this, as sat high above on the top of Olympus, and he roused the Etruscan to bitter battle, laying on him the sharp goad. 730 anger. So Tarshan rode among the slaughter in the ranks of his of routed to you, is retreating squadrons, whipping them up with all manner cries, calling on each man by name, and rallying the due battle. What are you afraid of, you Etruscans? Will never know shame? Will you always be so spiritless? This, and his weapons them. Night dancing care and rank cowardice. One woman has turned this whole army, scattering you to all points of the compass. What are for? Why do we carry swords in our hands, and not use you are not so sluggish when it comes to love-making and campaigns, or when the curved pipe calls you up to the chorus of Bacchus? Wait, then, for feasts and goblets from groaning tables. That is what you love. That is what you about. Do nothing till the soothsayer gives his blessing. 740 announces the festival, and the fat victim calls you into the deep horse into made a clasping enemy Latins carrying head of groves. When this harangue was over, he spurred his the thick of the enemy. He too was willing to die, and wild charge at Venulus. Tearing him off his horse and him in his right arm, he rode off at full gallop with his held in front of him. A shout rose to the sky, and all the turned to look as Tarshan flew like fire across the plain, man in armor with him. Then he broke off the steel, Venulus' spear, and with it probed for exposed flesh where. 750, he could give the fatal wound. Venulus fought back to keep Tarshan's hand from his throat, pitting strength against violence. It's just as when a tawny eagle has seized a snake and flown up into the sky, winding its talons round it and digging in claws. Meanwhile, the wounded serpent writhes in sinuous coils, its scales stiff and rough, and hisses as it reaches up with its head. But for all its struggles, the eagle never stops tearing at it with Tarshan there, the whose life, with its great hook of a beak, beating the air all the time its wings, just like such an eagle did the victorious carry off his prey from the Tiburtine ranks. Following leaders' example, and seeking like success, the Etruscans, men from Maeonia, rushed into battle. Then Aeneid, 760, was owed to the fates, circled round Camilla to find where of foot, superior through the in her. Fortune would offer the easiest approach. She was swift, but he was more than her equal with the javelin, and far in cunning. Wherever she went on her wild forays thick of battle, Aeneid was behind her, quietly following ranged tracks. Wherever she went as she returned in triumph and withdrew from her enemies, Aeneid pulled on his swift and kept out of sight. Round a whole circle he went, trying now one approach, now another, brandishing the fatal spear that had long never missed its mark. It then so chanced that Clorius appeared, a man who'd been consecrated to Cybele on her mountain, and in days past had been a priest. She saw him a long way off, resplendent, 770, in his Phrygian armor, and spurring his foaming war-horse. The overlapping with Lycian from his horsecloth was of hide with gold stitching and brass scales in the shape of feathers. He himself shone exotic indigo and purple. The arrows he shot from his bow were from Gorton in Crete, and the bow hanging of the folds brooch. He trousers Trojan, her shoulder was of gold. Gold, too, was the helm on the head priest, and on that day he had gathered the rustling linen of his saffron-yellow cloak into a knot with a golden war, an embroidered tunic and barbaric embroidered covered his legs. Whether her intention was to nail his armor to the temple doors or to sport captive gold on 780 hunting expeditions, she picked him out in the press of battle. Through and blind to all else and unthinking, she tracked him the whole army, burning with all a woman's passion for spoil and highest Apollo, the hour of faith, grant and plunder. At last the lurking Aeneid saw his moment, hurled his spear, offering up this prayer to heaven: O of the gods, guardian of the holy mountain of Soracte, we are the first to worship you. We heap up the wood of pine to feed your flames, and in your holy rites, sure and we walk on fire, sinking our feet deep in the hot ash. 790 now, all-powerful Father, that our arms be wiped clean of this of fame back to the granted but did disgrace. My mind is not set on spoils won from a girl, or trophy set up for routing her, or for any form of booty. My will come from my other feats of arms. But let this deadly scourge be defeated and fall to my spear, and I shall go the cities of my fathers, and claim no credit. Phoebus Apollo heard, and part of his prayer he decided answer, part he scattered to the swift breezes of air. He his prayer to surprise Camilla and lay her low in death, not allow the mountains of his native land to see him ever again. Away to hand. A sudden squall took these words and blew them far the winds of the south. So, when the spear that left his went whirring through the air and the Volscians, all of them, 800 turned their minds and eyes intently to their queen. She was not of the thinking of whirring or of air or of weapons coming out sky, and the shaft struck home beneath her naked breast, lodged there, drinking deep of her virgin blood. Her companions rushed in panic to support their falling queen, and Aeneid fled, had lost of the great, more terrified than anyone. Joy mixed with his fear. He his faith in his spear, and was afraid to face the weapon's warrior maiden, as when a wolf has killed a shepherd or 810 ox, and goes at once to hide high in the trackless hills before the he by so to dying. She and the from the avenging spears can come to look for him. He knows what is done, and takes fright, comforting his quivering tail, tucking it under his belly as he makes for the woods. Just did Aaron's disappear from sight in wild confusion, happy escape, and mingle in the press of battle. Camilla was tried to pull out the spear, but its steel point stood deep wound between the bones of her ribs. She was swooning loss of blood, her eyes dimming in the chill of death, and 820 flush had faded from her cheeks. With her dying breath, she most heart. Taking run must, and her the herself spoke to Akka, alone of all her young friends. She was her faithful companion, and to her alone she used to open her. I can do no more, Akka, my sister. This cruel wound is all my strength, and everything is going dark around me. From this place, and take my last commands to Turnus. He come into battle, and keep the Trojans away from the city. Now farewell. Even as she was speaking, she was losing hold on her reins, and in spite of all her efforts, she slid to ground. Then, growing cold, she little by little freed 830 from her body. Her neck drooped, and she laid down her head, left her now that charging to the yielding to death and letting go her weapons, as her life with a groan and fled in anger down to the shades. At this measureless clamor rose and struck the golden stars. Camilla had fallen. The battle raged as never before. In one solid mass came the whole army of the Trojans, Etruscan nobles, and the Arcadian squadrons of Evander. Opis, Diana's sentinel, had long been at her post high in, but the of mountains, watching the fighting and knowing no fear. When, far beneath her in the press of warriors shouting in frenzy of battle, she saw Camilla receive the bitter stroke. 840 death, she groaned and spoke these words from the depths of for you and not left yours will one desecrated life of her heart. Alas, Camilla, you have paid too cruel a price daring to challenge the Trojans in war, nor has it profited that alone in the wild woods you have worshipped Diana worn our quiver on your shoulder. But your queen has you unhonored now at your last hour. This death of not be forgotten among the peoples of this earth, and no shall say that you have died unavenged. Whoever has your body with a wound will pay just penalty with his. At the foot of a high mountain there was a huge mound, 850 earth shaded by dense ilex trees. It was the tomb of Dersinus, an ancient king of the Laurentines. Here the lovely goddess first alighted on her swift flight, keeping watch for errands from the high mound. When she saw him gleaming in his armor swollen with empty pride, she called out, "Why are you leaving? Die? You can die. Thracian, turn round and come in this direction. Come here, and must receive your reward for Camilla. Come, even a man by the weapons of Diana." When she had spoken, the 860 nymph took a winged arrow from her gilded quiver and drew the level. The arrow, and was him the heavenly flea, her deadly bow. Far back she stretched the string until curved horns of the bow were close together, her hands the left on the steel point of the arrow, the right holding string against her breast. Aaron's heard the hiss of the whir in the air, and in that same moment the steel planted in his flesh. His comrades paid no heed. They left breathing his last, and groaning in some place unknown in dust of the plain, while Opis soared on her wings to Olympus. The light-armed squadron of Camilla were the first to 870 when they lost their queen, then the Rutulians in a rout, then columns the bold Asylas, and all the scattered leaders and leaderless made for safety, wheeling their horses and galloping for walls. No weapon could check the deadly onset of the Trojans. Latins with hoofed plain, the first Latins, and no one could stand against them. Back rode the slack bowstrings on slumped shoulders, and the forebeat of their galloping horses drummed on the crumbling as the black cloud of swirling dust rolled up to the walls. Mothers stood on the watchtowers beating their breasts. The wailing of women rose to the stars in the sky. The 880 to burst into the open gates were pressed hard by a pursuing escape. Walls of homes, their breath. Their own column of enemies mingled with friends, and did not pitiable death. There, on the very threshold, within their native city and in the safe refuge of their own bodies were pierced, and they breathed out their life. Some shut the gates, and dared not open them to take was approaches who parents. Weight of people within the walls for all their pleading, and their piteous slaughter of the armed men guarding thee, and of men rushing to death on their weapons. Of those were shut out before the weeping eyes of their own, some rolled headlong down into the ditches with the rout behind them, while others came on blindly at full gallop. 890 and crashed into the massive gates with their firm-set posts. Their example, defense of when the battle fallen. Even the mothers strove their utmost. The true love of native land showed them the way, and Camilla was there. Wildly they hurled missiles from the walls and rushed to do the work of steel with stumps and stakes of oak wood hardened in the fire, longing to be the first to die in the walls of their city. Meanwhile the warrior Turnus was still in the wood. The bitter news came and filled his heart to overflowing. Words of Acca brought him great turmoil of spirit. The forces of the Volscians were destroyed. Camilla had 900. The enemy were attacking fiercely and had carried everything. City Jupiter his he. Aeneas emerged irresistibly before them. Panic was already reaching the walls. In a frenzy, and this is what the implacable will of decreed. He came down from the hills where he had kept ambush and left the wild woods behind him. Scarcely was out of sight and moving on to the plains when father entered the open pass. Came over the ridge and then from the woods. So then they were both making for the walls at from long moment speed, with their whole armies marching not many paces each other. Aeneas saw the Laurentine columns and the line of dust smoking on the plains at one and the same. 910 as Turnus recognized Aeneas advancing relentlessly under arms, instantly been the encamped, and heard the drumming of approaching hooves and the breathing of horses. They would have joined battle and tried the fortunes of war if the rose-red sun had not dipping its weary horses in the Iberian Sea, drawing down light of day and bringing on the night. They both before the city and built stockades on their ramparts. Book 12. Truce and duel going that the were. When Turnus saw the line of the Latins broken, the battle against them and their spirits flagging, when he realized time had come to honor his promises and that all eyes upon him, no more was needed. He burned with implacable rage, and his courage rose within him. Just as a lion in the fields then fearlessly threw round Carthage, who does not move into battle till he has received a great wound in his chest from the hunters, and revels in it, shaking out the thick mane on his neck. He snaps off the shaft left in his body by the ruffian that it, and opens his gory jaws to roar. Just so did the violent 10 passion rise in Turnus. At last he spoke these wild words to the king. Turnus keeps no man waiting. There is no excuse for to keep. Either deserted and whole half. Aeneas and his cowards to go back on their word or fail their agreement. I am coming to meet them. Bring out the sacraments, Father, and draw up the terms of the treaty. This right hand of mine will send this Trojan who is Asia down into Tartarus. The Latins can sit and watch. One man's sword shall refute a charge brought against a people, or else he can rule over those he has defeated, and Lavinia as his wife. 20 Latinus answered him, and his voice was calm. You are a great-hearted young warrior. The more you excel in fierce courage of hand has, the more urgent is my duty to take thought, to weigh all possible chances, and to be afraid. You have the kingdom your father Daunus. You have all the cities your right taken. I too, Latinus, have some wealth and some generosity of spirit. In Latium and the Laurentine fields there are other women for you to marry, and of the noblest families. This is not easy to listen, wrong for her, and say. Allow me to speak openly and honestly, and as you lay these words to your heart. For me it would have been to unite my daughter with any of those who came to ask in the past. It was forbidden by all the prophecies of gods. 30 men. But I gave way to my love for you. I gave way to the kinship of blood and to the grief and tears of my wife. Breaking to unjust that fall other, scarcely current of broad. Why accept the war all the ties that bound me? I seized Lavinia from the man whom she had been promised, and took up arms in cause. From that moment you see the calamities of war upon me, and the suffering that you bear more than any. Twice we have been crushed in great battles, and we can protect within our city the future hopes of Italy. The Thybris is even now warm with our blood, and the plains white with our bones. Why do I always give way? Do I change my resolve? What folly this is! I am ready to them as allies if Turnus is killed. Why not put an end to 40 while he is still alive? What will your kinsmen the Rutulians, what will the whole of the rest of Italy say if I betray you and you or accident's heavy heart send you to your death, which fortune forbid, when asking to marry my daughter? Remember the many of war, and take pity on your old father waiting with on only speak, chauffeur to far away in your native Ardea. These words had no effect Turnus. The violence of his fury mounted. The healing heightened the fever. As soon as he could bring himself to out came his reply. This concern you are so kind as to my sake. I beg of you for my sake, forget it, and allow me. 50 barter my life for glory. We too have weapons, father. We too around wound. Woman's hide queen she chosen to by any have some strength in our right arm to throw the steel, and when we strike a man, the blood flows from his mother the goddess will not be at hand with her tricks, lurking in the treacherous shadows, and trying to him in a cloud, when he turns tail. Terrified by this new turn in the fortunes of battle, Amida began to weep. Seeing her own death before her, tried to check the frenzy of Turnus, the man she had be the husband of her daughter. By these tears, Turnus. 60 respect for me that touches your heart. Amida begs of you this old. Latinus. Do not await's will, and see words, and the Indian lilies one thing. You are the one hope and the one relief of my age. In your hands rest the honor, and the power of our whole house is falling, and you are its one support. Persist in meeting the Trojans in battle. Whatever fate you in that encounter, waits also for me. If you die, I too leave the light I loathe. I shall never live to be a captive Aeneas married to Lavinia. When Lavinia heard these of her mother, her burning cheeks were bathed in tears, deep flush glowed and spread over her face. As when ivory has been stained with blood-red dye, or when white are crowded by roses and take on their red, such were the 70 colors on the maiden's face. Turnus was distraught with love-war. He used tears and the day words, and fixed his eyes on Lavinia. Burning all the more for then spoke these few words to Amida. Do not, I beg of mother, send me to the harsh encounters of war with such an evil omen. Turnus is not free to hold back of his death. Go as my messenger, Idmon, and take these of mine to the leader of the Phrygians, and little pleasure will born lead armies they give him. When tomorrow's dawn reddens in the sky, on the crimson wheels of Aurora's chariot, let him not Trojans against Rutulians. Let the Trojan and Rutulian 80 be at peace. His blood, or mine, shall decide this war. This is the decee of to swifter them. Combing his copper red the field where the hand of Lavinia shall be won. When he had finished speaking and rushed back into palace, he called for his horses, and it gladdened his heart them standing there before him neighing. Orythia, wife Boreas, had given them to Turnus' grandfather Polymnus honor him, and they were whiter than the snow and than the winds. The impatient charioteers stood round drumming on the horses' chests with cupped hands and their streaming manes. Then Turnus himself drew over shoulders the breastplate with scales of gold and pale, and fitted on his sword and shield, and his helmet with its 90 crests and horn sockets. The god of fire himself had made the sword for Turnus' father Daunus, dipping it white-hot in waters of the Styx. Then instantly he snatched up his mighty spear which was leaning there against a great column in the middle of the palace, spoil taken from Actor the Auruncan, and brandished it till it quivered, shouting, You, my spear, have time as of effeminate with never failed me when I have called upon you. Now the here, mighty Actor once wielded you. Now it is the right Turnus. Grant me the power to bring down that Phrygian, to tear the breastplate off his body and rend it. 100 my bare hands, to foul in the dust the hair he has curled with that piercing battle, by and given spirit, and settled hot steel, and steeped in myrrh. Such was the blazing fury drove him on. Sparks flew from his whole face, and his eyes flashed fire. He was like a bull coming into his first, bellowing fearfully and gathering his anger into his horns, goring a tree trunk and slashing the air, pawing the sand, making it fly as he rehearses for battle. Aeneas, meanwhile, arrayed in the arms his mother had him, was no less ferocious. He too was sharpening his, rousing himself to anger, rejoicing that the war was being won by the treaty he had proposed. He then reassured his allies, and future answer comforted the fears and anxieties of Iulus, telling of that had been decreed, ordering envoys to return affirm to Latinus and lay down the conditions for peace. The next day had scarcely risen, sprinkling the mountain tops with brightness, when the horses of the sun first reared up from light, duel between shared the deep sea and raised their nostrils to breathe out that the Rutulians and Trojans were measuring a field for the under the walls of the great city, setting out braziers the two armies, and building altars of turf to the gods. They 120 others, wearing sacrificial aprons, their foreheads bound with legion, they sighed the there though out. Leaders holy leaves, brought fire and spring water. The Ausonian advanced, armed with javelins, filling the gateways as streamed out of their city in serried ranks. On the other whole Trojan and Etruscan army came at the run in all varied armor, drawn up with weapons at the ready, as it were the bitter business of battle that was calling them thereto. In the middle of all these thousands, the hovered in the pride of purple and gold, Mnestheus of the horses, to propping line of Assaracus, brave Asylas and Messapus, tamer of son of Neptune. The signal was given. They all withdrew their places, planting their spears in the ground, and 130 their shields against them. Then in a sudden rush the mothers, those who could not bear arms, and the weak old men stood. Albin nor glory Trojans, addressed took up their seats on the towers and roofs of the city, or high on the gates. But Juno looked out from the top of what is now the mount. In those days it had neither name nor honor, and saw the plain, the two armies of Laurentines, and in the city of Latinus. Immediately the goddess Juno. 140 the goddess who was the sister of Turnus, the ruler of lakes, and king of pride of favored, mounted the roaring rivers, an honor granted by Jupiter the high heaven as the price of her ravished virginity. Nymph, all rivers, dearest to our heart, you know how I have you above all the other women of Italy who have set you yours, ungrateful bed of magnanimous Jupiter, and have gladly in your place in the skies. Learn now the grief which is Juturna, and do not lay the blame on me. As long as fortune well your he is seemed to permit it, as long as the fates allowed all to go with Latium, I have protected the warrior Turnus and walls. But now I see he is confronting a destiny to which 150 not equal. The day of the fates and the violence of his enemy go. It will from lovely Saturn are upon him. My eyes cannot look at this battle or at this treaty. If you dare to stand closer and help your brother, is right and proper. You suffer now. Perhaps a better time come. She had scarcely spoken when the tears flooded Juturna's eyes, and 3 times and more she beat her breasts. This is no time for tears, said Juno, daughter of go quickly, and if you can find a way, snatch your brother from death, or else stir up war, and dash from their hands this treaty words they have drawn up. You dare. I sanction. With these 160 she urged her on, then left her in doubt and confusion and wounded to the heart. Meanwhile the kings arrived, Latinus mighty in his 4-horse temples. Sunday chariot, with 12 gold rays encircling his shining proof of his descent from his grandfather the god of the Turnus, was in his chariot drawn by 2 white horses, gripping founder of shield the white 2 broad-bladed spears in his hand. From the other side, advancing from the camp, came Father Aeneas, the Roman race, with his divine armor blazing and his like a star. Beside him were Ascanius, the second hope for future greatness of Rome, and a priest arrayed in pure 170 vestments, driving to the burning altars a yearling you, as yet eyes hands victims altars call able to the you. unshorn, and the young of a breeding sow. Turning there towards the rising sun, the leaders stretched out there with offerings of salted meal, marked the peak of their foreheads with their blades, and poured libations on them from their goblets. Then devout Aeneas drew his sword and prayed, I now the sun to witness, and this land for which I have been endure such toil, I call upon the all-powerful Father of gods, and you his wife, Saturnian Juno, and I pray you, goddess, from this moment look more kindly on us, and 180 glorious Mars, under whose sway all wars are disposed. I call high upon springs and rivers. I call upon all the divinities of heaven and all the gods of the blue sea. If victory should chance withdraw, or sword, believe, Italians to defall to Ausonian Turnus, it is agreed that the defeated to the city of Evander. Iulus will leave these lands, and after this the people of Aeneas will not rise again in war, bring their armies here, or disturb this kingdom with the but if victory grants the day to us and to our arms, as she will, and may the gods so rule, I shall not order. 190 Obey Trojans, nor do I seek royal power for myself. Both nations and gods, solemn walls of it, Aeneas, shall move forward into an everlasting treaty, undefeated, equal before the law. I shall give the sacraments, and the Latinus, the father of my bride, will have the armies and authority in the state. For me the Trojans will build thee a city, and Lavinia will give it her name. So prayed Aeneas, and Latinus followed him, looking up, stretching his right hand towards the sky. I too swear, by the same, by earth and sea and stars, by the two children of Latona, and by two-browed Janus, by the divine powers beneath. 200 the earth and the holy house of unyielding Dis, and let the Father himself, who sanctions treaties by the flash of his lightning, hear gods, and when whatever aside, see, not that never that it leaving it steal. These my words, I touch his altar, I call to witness to the fires that stand between us. The day shall not come men of Italy shall violate this treaty or break this peace, chance will bring. This is my will, and no power will set it not if it dissolve the earth in flood, and pour it into thee if it melt the sky into Tartarus, just as this scepter, at moment he was holding his scepter in his hand, will sprout green or cast a shadow from delicate leaves, now has been cut from the base of its trunk in the forest, mother tree, and losing its limbs and leafy tresses to thee. To tin what was once a tree, skilled hands have now clad in the beauty. With such the victims, altars knotted of bronze, and given to the fathers of Latium to bear, words they sealed the treaty between them in full view of leaders of the peoples. Then, taking the duly consecrated, they cut their throats on to the altar fires, and, tearing the entrails from them while they still lived, they heaped them from laden platters. But it had long seemed to the Rutulians that this was even contest, and their hearts were still more confused, and they're dismayed when the two men appeared before their eyes. They saw at close range the difference in their strength. 220 fears were increased by the sight of Turnus stepping forward suppliant. All such and camers, whose was the due, and different quietly with downcast eyes to worship at the altar, like his cheeks were like a boy's, and there was a pallor over his youthful body. As soon as his sister Juturna saw that talk was spreading and that men's minds were weakening wavering, she came into the battle lines in the guise of whose family had been great from his earliest ancestors. Father had won fame for his courage, and who himself boldest of the bold in the use of arms. Into the middle of battle lines she advanced, while knowing what she had to there with these words, she sowed the seeds of many. 230 rumors. Is it not a disgrace, Rutulians, to sacrifice the life of and Trojans, hate one man for all of us? Are we not their equals in numbers and strength? Look, these few here are all they have, the Arcadians and the army sent by fate, the Etruscans who Turnus. We are short of enemies. Even if only half our number, Turnus himself, were to engage them in battle. As things are, the fame of will rise to the gods on whose altars he now dedicates, and he will live on the lips of men. But if we lose our native land, we shall be forced to obey proud masters, who now sit here of the idling in our fields." By such words she more and more inflamed the minds. 240 warriors, and murmurs crept through their ranks. Even the Laurentines had a change of heart, even the Latins, and men and prayed, and the more, and that of clamorous, he who a moment ago were longing for a rest from fighting safety for their people, now wanted their weapons, and that the treaty would come to nothing, pitying Turnus' injustice of his fate. At this moment Juturna did even showed a sign high in the sky, the most powerful portent ever confused and misled men of Italy. The tawny eagle Jupiter was flying in the red sky of morning, putting to flight the winged armies of birds along the shore, when 250 suddenly swooped down to the waves and seized a noble swan in his pitiless talons. The men of Italy thrilled at the sight. The wheeled-informed birds all shrieked, and, a wonder to behold, they their flight, darkening the heavens with their wings, and a cloud to mob their enemy high in the air until, exhausted by dropping their attacks and the weight of his prey, he gave way. Far there was it out of his talons into the river below, and taking flight away into the clouds. The Rutulians greeted the portent with a shout, and hands were quick to their swords. Tolumnius, the augur, 260 the first to speak. "At last," he cried, "at last. This is what I have so often prayed to see. I accept the omen and acknowledge that my strikes attacking Farrier he has his word gods. It is I who will lead you. Now take up your arms, O poor countrymen, into whose hearts the pitiless stranger the terror of war. You are like the feeble birds, and he is, and plundering your shores. He will take to flight and sail away over the sea. But you must all be of one mind, mass forces into one flock and fight to defend your king whom seized." When he had spoken, he ran forward and hurled Cornelwood's spear at the enemy, standing opposite. It great wedged confusion through the air and flew unerringly. In that moment a shout arose. In that moment all the ranks drawn up in formation were thrown into disorder, and in they 270 men's hearts blazed with sudden passion. The spear flew on. By opposite Terina to the chance 9 splendid brothers had taken their stand Tolumnius, all of them sons born by the faithful her Arcadian husband Gylippus. It struck one of these and bit brilliance, stretched a whole waist where the sewn belt chafed the belly and the buckle the side straps. He was noble in his looks and in the of his armor, and the spear drove through his ribs and him on the yellow sand. Burning with grief, his brothers, phalanx of spirited warriors, drew their swords or snatched up 280 their throwing spears and rushed blindly forward. The ranks of side the Agila single sword. They the whole the Laurentines ran to meet them, while from the other massed Trojans came flooding up with Etruscans from and Arcadians in their brightly colored armor. One passion drove them on. To settle the matter by the tore down the altars, and a wild storm of missiles filled braziers nothing bridled stood sky, and fell in a rain of steel. The mixing bowls and were removed, and now that the treaty had come to even Latinus took to flight with his rejected gods. Some the teams of their chariots, some leapt on their horses, and at the ready with drawn swords. 290 Messapus, eager to wreck the treaty, rode straight at the Etruscan Alestes, a king wearing the insignia of a king, and the retreated, behind charging horse drove him back in terror. He fell as he, and crashed violently head and shoulders into the altar him. Riding furiously, Messapus flew to him, and, towering over him with a lance as long as a house beam, he struck him his much offer to wild death blow even as he poured out prayers for mercy. "So for Alestes," cried Messapus, "this is a better victim to the great gods," and the men of Italy ran to strip the body, it was still warm. Corneas came to meet them, snatching a half-burnt torch from an altar. Ebusus made for him, but before 300 he could strike a blow, Corneas filled his face with fire. His great beard flared up and gave off a stench as it burned. Corneas pressed his attack, and, clutching the hair of ground, steel and the naked, helpless enemy in his left hand, he forced him to the kneeling on him with all his weight, and sunk the heart in his flank. Meanwhile, Podalirius had been following the shepherd Alsus as he rushed through the hail of missiles' front line of battle and was now poised over him with the sword. But, drawing back his axe, Alsus struck him full in the middle of the forehead and split it to the chin, bathing all his armor in a shower of blood. It was a cruel rest then for 310 Podalirius. An iron sleep bore down upon him and closed his hysue. Control agreed. I forget make it mine, still struck eyes in everlasting night. But true to his vow Aeneas, unhelmeted, stretched out weaponless right hand and called to his allies. We're a-rushing? What is this sudden discord rising among you? Your anger. The treaty is already struck, and its terms alone have the right of conflict. Leave me to fight and your fears. We have a treaty, and my right hand will good. The rituals we have performed have made Turnus while he was still speaking. While words like these were passing his lips, an arrow came whirring in its flight, and 320 him, unknown the hand that shot it and the force that spun it such lost in Aeneas. Of the heart, flash he flew to its target, unknown what chance or what god brought honor to the Rutulians. The shining glory of the deed is darkness, and no man boasted that he had wounded when Turnus saw him leaving the field and the leader's allies in dismay. A sudden fire of hope kindled in his horses and arms. He demanded both at once, and in a leapt on his chariot with spirits soaring and gathered up reins. Then many a brave hero he sent down to death as 330 along, and many half-dead bodies he sent rolling on the ground, as he had crushing whole columns of men under his chariot wheels caught up their spears and showered them on those who taken to flight. Just as Mars, spattered with blood, charges along shield and the banks of the icy river Hebrus, clashing sword on they fly the drumming, giving full rein to his furious horses as he stirs up war, across the open plain before the winds of the south and west, till Thrace roars to its furthest reaches with the of their hooves, as his escort gallops all round him, rage. Treachery his sweat, and the dark faces of fear. Just so did bold Turnus lash horses through the thick of battle till they smoked with, and as he trampled the pitiable bodies of his dead enemies, the 340 flying hooves scattered a dew of blood and churned the gore from combat. Glaucus into the sand. Sthenelus he sent to his death with a throw long range. Then Thamyris and Pholus, both in close from long range. 2. He struck down the Ambracidae, and Lades, whom their father Embraces himself had brought up either to enlitia, and gave them armor that equipped them the his were his due battle or to outstrip the winds on horseback. In another part of the field, Eumedes was charging into fray. He was a famous warrior, son of old Dolon, bearing grandfather's name, but his spirit and his hand for war. 350 fathers. It was Dolon who dared to ask for the chariot of Achilles as a reward for going to spy on the camp of the Greeks, and he Turnus struck him. But Diomed provided a different reward for his daring, soon ceased to aspire to the horses of Achilles. When caught sight of Eumedes far off on the open plain, he lay chariot, he on his at they first with a light javelin thrown over the vast space that between. Then, halting the two horses that drew his leapt down, and stood over his dying enemy with his foot neck. He wrenched the sword out of Eumedes' hand, and flashed as he dipped it deep in his throat, saying, There. 360 R, Trojan. These are the fields of Hesperia you try to take for those cities. Thymedes, just as by war. Lie there and measure them. This is my reward who test me by the sword. This is how they build their next. With a throw of his javelin, he sent Aspietes to join then Chlorius, Sybaris, Dares, Thersilochus, and whose horse had fallen and thrown him over its head. When the breath of Thracian Boreas sounds upon the deep Aegean as he pursues the waves to the shore, and wherever the across the gave way own winds put out their strength the clouds take to flight sky, just so, wherever Turnus cut his path, the enemy before him, their ranks breaking and running, and his 370 impetus carried him forward with the plumes on his helmet tossing as he drove his chariot into the wind. Phegeus could not endure this onslaught of Turnus and his wild shouting, but leapt as was breaking his in front of the chariot, and pulled round the horses' heads. They galloped at him, foaming at their bits. Then, as he dragged along hanging from the yoke, the broad blade of Turnus' lance struck his unprotected side, piercing in the double mesh of his breastplate and grazing the skin of body. He put up his shield and was twisting round to face 380 enemy when he fell and was caught by the flying wheel and axle struck of the plane, faithful in fury, and stretched out on the ground. Turnus, following up him between the bottom of the helmet and the top-edge breastplate, cutting off his head and leaving the trunk on the sand. While the victorious Turnus was dealing death on the Aeneas was taken into the camp by Mnestheus and Achates. Ascanius was with them. Aeneas was bleeding, leaning on his long spear at every other step. He was in a tugging at the arrowhead broken in the wound, and demanding Maca that they should take the quickest way of helping him. 390 broad cut with the blade of a sword, slice open the flesh where the arrow was embedded, and get him back into battle. But now Loved had arts and ordered apply that there came Iapix, son of Iasus, whom Phoebus Apollo above all other men. Overcome by this fierce love, Apollo long since offered freely and joyfully to give him all his powers, prophecy, the lyre, the swift arrow, but, and to prolong the life of his dying father, Iapix chose rather a mute, inglorious art, and know the virtues of herbs and 400 practice of healing. There, with the grieving Iulus, in the middle savagely. The all he Apollo. Forceps patron drew thee of a great crowd of warriors, stood Aeneas, growling leaning on his great spear, and unmoved by their tears. Man, with his robe caught up and tied behind him after fashion of Apollo Pigeon, tried anxiously and tried in vain could do with his healing hands, and the potent herbs of in vain his right hand worked at the dart. In vain the gripped the steel. Fortune did not show the way, and his Apollo gave no help. And all the time the horror of battle fiercer and fiercer on the plain, and nearer the danger. They soon could see a wall of dust in the sky. Cavalry rode up, and showers of missiles were falling into the middle of the camp. A hideous noise of shouting rose too. 410 the heavens as young men fought and fell under the iron hand suffering. This crowned well, and this at bulls, panacea of Mars. At this Venus, dismayed by her son's undeserved, picked some Didone on Mount Ida in Crete. The stalk of plant has a vigorous growth of leaves, and its head is by a purple flower. It is a herb which wild goats no feed on when arrows have flown and stuck in their backs. Venus brought down, veiled in a blinding cloud, and with tinctured the river water they had poured into shining, impregnating it secretly, and sprinkling in it fragrant. 420 and the health-giving juices of ambrosia. Such was the water wound, body, of its in fresh state, the with which old Iapix, without knowing it, bathed thee, and suddenly, in that moment, all the pain left Aeneas, and the blood was staunched in the depths of the wound. On accord the arrow came away in the hand of Iapix, strength flowed into Aeneas, restoring him to his former. It was Iapix who was the first to fire their spirits to face enemy. Bring the warrior his arms, and quickly, he cried. Why gnaw you and stand there? This cure was not effected by human power, by the guidance of art. It is not my right hand that saved Aeneas. Some greater power, some god, is driving you. 430, sending you back to greater deeds. Aeneas was hungry for battle. He had already sheathed his calves in his golden greaves, and was brandishing his flashing spear, impatient of delay. When back, lightly learned the shield was fitted to his side, and the breastplate to his, he took Ascanius in an armed embrace, and kissed him through the helmet, saying, From me, my son, you can courage and hard toil. Others will teach you about fortune. My hand will now defend you in war, and lead you where the prizes ripen and your mind are great. I charge you, when in due course your years you become a man, do not forget, but as you go over in 440 the examples of your kinsmen, let your spirit rise at the thought gates there of your father Aeneas and your uncle Hector. When he had finished speaking, he moved through thee in all his massive might, brandishing his huge spear, and rushed with him in serried ranks Antheus and Mnestheus, and then trembled Turnus also marrow of sound, all his escort, streaming from the camp. A blinding dust darkened the plain. The very earth was stirred, and under the drumming of their feet, as they advanced, saw them from the rampart opposite. The men of Ausonius saw them, and cold tremors of fear ran through their bones. But before all the Latins, Juturna heard the 450 and knew its meaning. She fled, trembling, but Aeneas came. Just as mid-ocean bring, swiftly on, leading his dark army over the open plain. When a cloud blots out the sun and begins to move from towards the land, long-suffering farmers see it in the far distance and shudder to the heart, knowing what it will the ruin of trees, the slaughter of their crops, and destruction is first. Radium formation, everywhere, the flying winds come first, and their sound to reach the shore. Just so the Trojan leader drove his army forward against the enemy and wedged each man shoulder to shoulder with his neighbor. Fierce. Osiris was struck by the sword of Thymbraeus. Mnestheus cut down. 460 Arcetius, Achates Epulo, and Gaius Euphens. Tolumnius himself fell, the augur who had been the first to hurl a spear against his dust, who stood looking thick maiden enemies. The shouting rose to the sky, and now it was the Rutulians who turned and fled over the fields, raising thee on their backs. Aeneas did not think fit to cut down men had turned away from him, nor did he go after those who to meet him in equal combat or carried spears. He was for Turnus, and only Turnus, tracking him through the murk. Turnus was the only man he asked to fight. Seeing this, and being stricken with fear, the warrior 470 Juturna threw out Metiscus, the driver of Turnus' chariot, from them voice and great food sometimes round middle of between the reins, and left him lying where he fell, far chariot pole. She herself took over the reins, and whipped up to make them ripple, the very image of Metiscus in form and armor, like a black swallow flying through the house of some wealthy man, and collecting tiny scraps of dainties for her young chattering on the nest. Her twittering is heard in empty colonnades, sometimes marshy pools. Just so did Juturna ride through the enemy, and the swift chariot flew all over the field. Now triumph, here, now there she gave glimpses of her brother in 480, but then she would fly off, and not allow him to join in the battle. Followed name at battle. Match the swung do, came, and the tipped. But Aeneas was no less determined to meet him and his every twist and turn, tracking him and calling the top of his voice all through the scattered lines of every time he caught sight of his enemy. He tried to speed of his wing-footed horses, and every time Juturna the chariot round, and took to flight. What was Aeneas to conflicting tides seethed in his mind? But no answer different passions drove him to opposing thoughts. Then nimble Messapus, who was running with 2 pliant steel dash 490 javelins in his left hand, aimed one of them at Aeneas and hurled behind helmet anger Turnus again, he it true. Aeneas checked himself and crouched on one knee his shield, but the flying spear sheared off the peak of his, and carried away the plumes from the top of it. At this his rose. Treachery had given him no choice. When he saw horses pull the chariot round and withdraw again, and called upon Jupiter and the altars of the broken treaty, and then enemies. He sparing no, and not till then. He plunged into the middle of his was terrible in his might, and Mars was aiding him. Rein to man, he roused himself to savage slaughter, and gave full his anger. 500 What God could unfold all this bitter suffering for me? What for the will, time to long? Through quickest, God could express in song all the different ways of death men, and for their leaders, driven back and forth across plain, now by Turnus, now by Trojan Aeneas? Was it your O Jupiter, that peoples who were to live at peace for all should clash so violently in war? Aeneas met Sucro the Rutulian. This was the first clash checked the Trojan charge, but Sucro did not detain them. Aeneas caught him in the side, and drove the raw steel the cage of the ribs to the breast where death comes. 510 Turnus, now on foot, met Diores and his brother Amycus, who within chariot and had been unhorsed. As Diores rode at him, he struck him his long spear. Amycus he dispatched with his sword. Cutting off both their heads, he hung them from his deaths. Bora was fields of, but his was poor carried them along with him, dripping their dew of blood. Aeneas sent Talos, Tanais, and brave Cethegus to their all three in one encounter. Then the gloomy Onites, who name linked with Echion of Thebes, and whose mother Peridia. Turnus killed the brothers who came from the Apollo and Lycia, then young Menoetes, who hated war. That did not save him. He was an Arcadian who had plied art all round the rivers of Lerna, rich in fish. His home. 520, and he never knew the munificence of the great. His father sowed his crops on hired land. Like fires started indifferent, like high in there rushed within wound places in a dry wood or in thickets of crackling laurel, or foaming rivers roaring as they run down in spate from the mountains to the sea, sweeping away everything that lies path. No more sluggish were Aeneas and Turnus as they over the field of battle. Now if ever did the anger seethe them, now burst their unconquerable hearts, and every they gave with all their might. 530 Muranus was sounding the names of his father's fathers and their fathers before them, his whole lineage through all the king's chariot forward their hideously gilded braying, as did by of Latium, when Aeneas knocked him flying from his with a rock, a huge boulder he sent whirling at him, and stretched him out on the ground. The wheels rolled him in a tangle of yoke and reins, and his galloping horses had no thought for their master as they trampled him under clattering hoofs. Hyllus made a wild charge, roaring, but Turnus ran to meet him and spun a javelin at his forehead. Through the helmet it went and stuck in his for you. Cretheus, bravest of the Greeks, your right hand not rescue you from Turnus, nor was Cupincus protected. 540 his gods when Aeneas came near, but his breast met the steel his fall, and Greek who was the below grave is into face, and the bronze shield did not hold back the moment of death. You too, Aeolus, the Laurentine plain saw you your back cover a broad measure of their ground. The battalions could not bring you down, nor could Achilles overturn the kingdom of Priam, but here you lie. This finishing line of your life. Your home was in the hills Mount Ida, a home in the hills of Lyrnessus, but your Laurentine soil. The two armies were now wholly turned one another, all the Latins and all the Trojans. Mnestheus 550 bold Serestus, Messapus, tamer of horses, and brave Asylas, strength no goddesses, instantly this lines, and the battalion of Etruscans and the Arcadian squadrons of Evander were striving each man with all his resources of and will, waging this immense conflict with no rest and respite. At that moment Aeneas' mother, loveliest of the put it into his mind to go to the city, to lead his army against the walls and throw the Latins into confusion at sudden calamity. Turning his eyes this way and that as he tracked down Turnus through all the different battle, he noticed the city, untouched by this great war, quiet. 560 unharmed, and his spirit was fired by the sudden thought of Trojans took Trojan greater battle he could fight. Calling the leaders of the together, Mnestheus, Sergestus, and the brave Serestus, he up position on some rising ground, and the whole of the legion joined them there in close formation without laying down their shields or spears. Aeneas addressed them standing in the middle of a high mound of earth. There must be no delay, man must the Latinus, except carrying out my commands. Jupiter is on our side. No go to work half-heartedly, because my plan is new to him. City is the cause of this war. It is the very kingdom of, and if they do not this day agree to submit to the yoke, to defeat, and to obey, I shall root it out and level its smoking roofs. 570 to the ground. Am I to wait until Turnus thinks fit to stand up already, and shall all have moved appeared? Pieces the darkened the to me in battle, and consents to meet the man who has defeated him? O my fellow citizens, this city is the head heart of this wicked war. Bring your torches now, and we claim our treaty with fire. When he had finished speaking, they formed a wedge, them striving with equal resolve in their hearts, and towards the walls in a solid mass. Ladders suddenly fire came to hand. They rushed the gates and cut to first guards that met them. They spun their javelins and the heavens with steel. Aeneas himself, standing among 580 leaders under the city wall with his right hand outstretched, lifted up his voice to accuse Latinus, calling the gods to witness battle. Alarmed city to be that this was the second time he had been forced into twice already the Italians had shown themselves to be his enemies. This was not the first treaty they had violated. And discord rose among the citizens. Some wanted the opened up and the gates thrown wide to receive the Trojans, and others they even dragged the king himself onto the ramparts. Just as well away bees, caught up their weapons and rushed to defend the walls. When a shepherd tracks some bees to their home, shut inside a porous rock, and fills it with acrid smoke, the 590, alarmed for their safety, rush in all directions through their fiercely inside smoke. Latins as enemy up to the wax-built camp, sharpening their wrath and buzzing then as the black stench rolls through their chambers, the of the rock booms with their blind complaints, and the flies to the empty winds. Weary as they were, a new misfortune now befell thee and shook their whole city to its foundations with grief. Soon as the queen, standing on the palace roof, saw thee approaching the city, the walls under attack, fire-flying roofs, no Rutulian army anywhere to confront the enemy, and that he instant no sign of Turnus' columns, she thought in her misery had been killed in the cut and thrust of battle. In that 600 her mind was deranged with grief, and she screamed that she these evils resolved to hideous thee. Lavinia was the cause, the guilty one, the fountainhead of all, pouring her heart out in sorrow and madness, she died. Her hand rent her purple robes, and she died a death in the noose of a rope tied to a high beam. When unhappy women of Latium heard of this, her daughter their report was the first to tear her golden hair and rosy cheeks. The whole household was wild with grief around her, and lamentations rang all through the palace. From there the spread through the whole city, and gloom was everywhere. 610 Latinus went with his garments torn, dazed by the death of his Turnus' wife and the downfall of his city, fouling his gray hair handfuls of dirt and dust. Meanwhile, on a distant part of the plain, the warrior was chasing a few stragglers. He was less vigorous now, and less delighted with the triumphant progress of his horses, when the wind carried to him this sound of shouting and of confused, unexplained terror. He pricked up his ears. It was a 6:20 noise from the city, a murmuring with no hint of joy in it. What stopped the this who control, let us showed city. Battle, is this? He cried in wild dismay, pulling on the reins to chariot. Why such grief and distress on the walls, and all clamor streaming from every part of the city? His sister was driving the chariot in the shape of Metiscus, and had of the horses and the reins, protested. This way, Turnus. Go after these Trojans. This is where our first victory's us the way. There are others whose hands can defend the Aeneas is bearing hard on Italians in all the confusion of 630. We too can deal out death without pity to Trojans. You will kill war, some scheming you as many as he does, and not fall short in the honors of Turnus made his reply. O my sister, I recognized you time ago when first you shattered the treaty with your and engaged in this war, and you do not deceive me now, pretending not to be a goddess. But whose will is it that have been sent down from Olympus to endure this agony? Was it all to see the cruel death of your pitiable brother? For what now? And I am I to do? What stroke of fortune could grant me safety? No one is left whom I love as much as I loved Muranus. 640 have seen him before my own eyes calling for me as he fell. Euphins have shall I turn bad, a mighty warrior laid low by a mighty wound. The luckless has died rather than look on my disgrace, and the Trojans his body and his arms. Shall I stand by and see our homes destroyed? This is the one indignity that remained, and not lift my hand to refute the words of Drances? Shall I tell? Will this land of Italy see Turnus on the run? Is it so thing to die? Be gracious to me, you gods of the underworld, since the gods above have turned their faces from me. My spirit such will come down to you unstained, knowing nothing of dishonor, and worthy of my great ancestors to the end. 650 Scarcely had he finished speaking when Saces suddenly came to face. On you you're galloping up on his foaming horse, having ridden through middle of the enemy with an arrow wound full in as he rushed, calling the name of Turnus and imploring him, are our last hope of safety, Turnus. You must take pity on lightning of Italy flying you. Merry people, the sword and spear of Aeneas are like thee, and he is threatening to throw down the highest citadels and give them over to destruction. Firebrands are already to the roofs. Every Latin face, every Latin eye, is turned to the king himself, is at a loss. Whom should he choose to? 660 our daughters? What treaty should he turn to? And then the life. Front line, an enemy bristling in the shape won through queen, who placed all her trust in you, has taken her own fear, overcame her, and she fled the light of day. Alone in of the gates Messapus and bold Atenas are holding thee all round them on every side stand the battalions of the enserried ranks. Their drawn swords are a crop of steel in the fields, and you are out here wheeling your chariot deserted grasslands. Turnus was thunderstruck, bewildered by the changing of his fortune, and stood there dumb and staring. In that heart of his there seethed a bitter shame, a grief shot with madness, love driven on by fury, and a consciousness of his own courage. As soon as the shadows lifted from his mind, 670 and light returned, he forced his burning eyes round towards the tongue hold of under time has them me. I suffer to the walls, looking back in deep dismay from his chariot at great city. There, between the stories of a tower, came a flame, rolling and billowing to the sky. It was taking the tower, which he had built himself, putting the wheels it, and fitting the long gangways. Sister, he said, the come at last. The fates are too strong. You must not delay any longer. Let us go where God and cruel fortune call. Am resolved to meet Aeneas in battle. I am resolved to what bitterness there is in death. You will not see me put. 680 Shame again. This is madness, but before I die, I beg of you, let me be mad. No sooner had he spoken than he leapt to the ground from his chariot and dashed through all his enemies and his boulder out by stealthy terrific their weapons, leaving his sister behind him to grieve as charge broke through the middle of their ranks. Just as it comes crashing down from the top of a mountain, torn gales, washed out by flood water or loosened by the passing of the years, it comes down the sheer face with force, an evil mountain of rock, and bounds over the plain. 690 rolling with it woods and flocks and men, so did Turnus crash walls of in the hand. Enough, whatever one man mattereth through the shattered ranks of his enemies towards to the city where all the ground was wet with shed blood, airs sang with flying spears. There he made a sign with his, and in the same moment he called out in a loud voice, Rutulians, put up your weapons, and you too Latins. Fortune brings his mine. It is better that I should be the who atones for this treaty for all of you, and settles the with the sword. At these words the armies parted and left clear space in the middle between them. But when Father Aeneas heard the name of Turnus, he abandoned the walls and the lofty citadel, sweeping aside all delay 700 and breaking off all his works of war. He leapt for joy and clashed his armor with a noise as terrible as thunder. Huge he flanks, and last was as Mount Athos or Mount Eryx or Father Apenninus himself roaring when the home oaks shimmer on his delighting to raise his snowy head into the winds. Now at the Rutulians and the Trojans and all the men of Italy, the defenders guarding the high ramparts and the besiegers pounding the base of the walls with their rams, they all turned shoulders, too huge together to their eyes eagerly to see, and took the armor off. Their king Latinus himself was amazed at the sight of these heroes born at opposite sides of the earth coming. 710 decide the issue by the sword. There, on a piece of open ground on the plain, they threw their spears at long range as they charged, and when they clashed the bronze of their shields rang with confusion. Out, and the earth groaned. Blow upon blow they dealt their swords as chance and courage met and mingled into silent sea-hole. Just as two enemy bulls on the great mountain of Sela or on top of Tibernus bring their horns to bear and charge battle. The herdsmen stand back in terror, the herd stands and afraid, and the heifers low quietly together waiting to who is to rule the grove, who is to be the leader of the 720 herd. Meanwhile the bulls are locked together exchanging blow shoulders lowing of filled thee upon blow, gouging horn into hide till their necks, and are awash with blood, and all the grove rings with air and groaning. Just so did Aeneas of Troy, and Turnus' son Daunus rush together with shields clashing, and the din with the two and his heavens. Then Jupiter himself lifted up a pair of scales tongues centered, and put the lives of the two men in them decide, who would be condemned in the ordeal of battle, with whose weight death would descend. Turnus leapt forward thinking he was safe, and lifting 730 sword, and rising to his full height, he struck with all his strength their height, and left them holding story goes his fathers, and armor behind it. The Trojans shouted and the Latins cried out in anxiety, while both armies watched intently. But in the of his passion the treacherous sword broke in mid-blow him defenseless, had he not sought help in flight. Faster the east wind he flew. When he saw his own right hand nothing but a sword handle he did not recognize. That when his horses were yoked, and he was mounting chariot in headlong haste to begin the battle, he left his sword behind, and caught up the sword of his charioteer Metiscus. For some time, while the Trojans were scattered in flight, that was enough. But when it met the divine 740 made by Vulcan, the mortal blade was brittle as an icicle and shattered on impact, leaving its fragments glittering on the escape now barrier that was unable heal's golden sand. At this Turnus fled in despair and tried to another part of the plain, weaving his uncertain course to this side now to that, for the Trojans formed a dense round him, hemming him in between a huge marsh and high walls. Nor did Aeneas let up in his pursuit, slowed down as he by the arrow wound, his legs failing him sometimes and to run. He still was ablaze with fury and kept hard on the 750 of the terrified Turnus, like a hunting dog that happens to trap used as of the stag river untiring has, but he rises sound a stag in the bend of a river, or in a ring of red feathers scare, pressing him hard with his running and barking, is terrified by the ambush he is caught in or by the high bank. He runs and runs back 1,000 ways, but the Umbrian hound stays with him with jaws gaping. Now he seems to have him, and the jaws snap shut, is thwarted and bites the empty air. Then as the shouting louder than ever, all the river banks and pools return thee, and the whole sky thunders with the din. As he ran, Turnus kept and shouting at the Rutulians, calling each of them by name. 760 demanding the sword he knew so well. Aeneas on the other anyone them, and 5 rewound when out of stood on it to the forehand was threatening instant death and destruction to who came near. Much as that alarmed them, he terrified even more by threatening to raze their city to the ground. Though he was wounded, he did not slacken in his pursuit. Times round they ran in one direction, 5 times they the circle. For this was no small prize they were trying to gain. What they were competing for was the lifeblood. Turnus. It so chanced that a bitter-leaved wild olive tree had this spot, sacred to Faunus and long revered by sailors. Men saved from storms at sea used to nail their offerings Laurentine god, and dedicate the clothes they had vowed. 770 their safety. But the Trojans, making no exception for the sacred, in this of his tree trunk, had removed it to clear space for the combat. Stumped the spear of Aeneas was now embedded. The forced throw had carried it here, and lodged it fast in the tough wood that he on foot. Faunus, have of the root. He strained at it and tried to pull it out so could hunt with a missile the quarry. He could not catch wild now with fear. Turnus cried, "Pity me, I beg of you. And you, good Mother Earth, hold on to that spear, if I always paid you those honors which Aeneas and his men 780 profaned in war." So he prayed, and he did not call for the help with the bite his once forward nymph warriors, behind of the god in vain. Aeneas was long delayed, struggling stubborn stump, and no strength of his could prise open of the wood. While he was heaving and straining with all might, the goddess Juturna, daughter of Daunus, changed more into the shape of the charioteer Metiscus, and ran to give Turnus his sword. Venus was indignant that was allowed to be so bold, so she came and wrenched out Aeneas' spear from deep in the root. Then these glorious their weapons and their spirits restored to them, one relying on his sword, the other towering and formidable. 790 his spear stood there breathing hard, ready to engage in the contest of war. Words, what is that you write to there in violence that from help? Meanwhile the king of all-powerful Olympus saw Juno watching the battle from a golden cloud, and spoke these to her. O my dear wife, what will be the end of this? There left for you to do? You yourself know, and admit that Aeneas is a god of this land, that he has a heaven and is fated to be raised to the stars. What are you scheming? What do you hope to achieve by perching those chilly clouds? Was it right that a god should suffer and be wounded by the hand of a mortal? Was it right Turnus should be given back the sword that was taken him? For what could Juturna have done without your 800? Why have you put strength into the arm of the defeated? The hour and time has come at last for you to cease and give way to entreaties. Do not let this great sorrow gnaw at your heart silence, and do not make me listen to grief and resentment forever streaming from your sweet lips. The end has come. You to light and mix have been able to harry the Trojans by sea and by land, the fires of an unholy war, to soil a house with sorrow, the sound of mourning with the marriage song. I forbid you to goddess have go further. These were the words of Jupiter. With bowed head to Juno, daughter of Saturn, made this reply. Because I known your will, great Jupiter, against my own wishes I. 810 abandoned Turnus and abandoned the earth. But for your will, cloud in. Trojans, Juturna, my not which these you would not be seeing me sitting alone in mid-air on a suffering whatever is sent me to suffer. I would be clothed fire, standing close into the line of battle and dragging into bloody combat. It was I admit it, who persuaded to come to the help of her unfortunate brother, and with blessing to show greater daring for the sake of his life, but to shoot arrows, not to stretch the bow. I swear it by the implacable fountainhead of the river Styx, the one oath binds the gods of heaven. And now I, Juno, yield and quit 820 battles which I so detest, but I entreat you for the sake of Latium. Fate I peace and the honor of your own kin, to allow what the law of does not forbid. When at last their marriages are blessed, offer no obstruction. When at last they come together in and make their laws and treaties together, do not command the become make. Latium, and of Troy, replied. Latins to change their ancient name in their own land, to Trojans, and be called Teucrians. They are men. Do not them change their voice or native dress. Let there be. Let the Alban kings live on from generation to generation. The stock of Rome be made mighty by the manly courage Italy. Troy has fallen. Let it lie, Troy, in the name of he who devised mankind, and all the world smiled. And 830, you are the true sister of Jupiter and the second child of Saturn. Heart. Grant people ancient will join, will give Latins. Arise such waves of anger, do you set rolling from deep in your, but come now, lay aside this fury that arose in vain. I what you wish. I yield. I relent of my own free will. The of Ausonia will keep the tongue of their fathers and their ways. As their name is, so shall it remain. The Trojans them in body only, and will then be submerged. Ritual I and the modes of worship, and I will make them all speaking one tongue. You will see that the people who from this admixture of Ausonian blood will be above all men. 840 above the gods, in devotion, and no other race will be their equals in paying you honor. Juno nodded in assent. She rejoiced, and in brother's goddess forced her mind to change, leaving the cloud behind her withdrawing from the sky. This done, the father of the gods pondered another task his mind, and prepared to dismiss Juturna from her side. There are two monsters named Diary born to thee of the dead of night, in one and the same litter with Magira of Tartarus. The heads of all three she bound with coiling snakes. 850, and gave them wings to ride the wind. These attend the throne fears of plagues or visitation heights. She flew going who of savage Jupiter in his royal palace, and sharpened the suffering mortals whenever the king of the gods sets hideous deaths in motion or terrifies guilty cities by the of war. One of these Jupiter sent swiftly down from the of heaven with orders to confront Juturna as an omen, to earth, carried in a swift whirlwind. Like an arrow through a cloud, spun from the bowstring of a Parthian, has armed the barb with a virulent poison for which there is no as it cure, a Parthian or a Cretan from Cydonia, and it worse. 860 flies unseen through the swift darkness. So flew the daughter battle shape of empty shades of Turnus, strange his of night, making for the earth. When she saw the Trojan lines and the army of Turnus, she took in an instant the of the little bird which perches on tombs and the gables houses and sings late its ill-omened song among the night. In this guise the monster flew again and again at face, screeching and beating his shield with her wings. A numbness came over him, and his bones melted with fear. Hair stood on end, and the voice stuck in his throat. 870, his sister Juturna recognized the Daira from a long way off by Tor crying. Have art such the whirring of her wings, and grieved. She loosened, and her hair. She scratched her face and beat her breast. What can your sister do to help you now, Turnus? Much I endured, but nothing now remains for me, and I have no that could prolong your life. How can I set myself against a portent? At last, I leave the battle. Do not frighten me, you birds of evil omen. I am already afraid. I know the beating understand reward me of your wings and the sound of death. I do not fail to the proud commands of great-hearted Jupiter. Is this his for my lost virginity? For what purpose has he granted 880 eternal life? Why has he deprived me of the state of death? But and this is without enough these moaning river, flashing his anger. Turnus, for that I could at least have put an end to my suffering borne my poor brother company through the shades. So immortality, will anything that is mine be sweet to me, you, my brother? Is there no abyss that can open deep to take a goddess down to the deepest of the shades? At words, covering her head in a blue-green veil, and bitterly, the goddess plunged into the depths of her own. Aeneas kept pressing his pursuit with his huge spear as long as a tree, and these were the words he spoke in. What is the delay now? Why are you still shirking? 890, this is not a race. It is a fight with dangerous weapons at close quarters. Turn yourself into any shape you like. Scrape together all your resources of spirit and skill. Pray to sprout wings and a whole fierce, that said and boundary fly to the stars of heaven, or shut yourself up and hide in the ground. Turnus replied, shaking his head, You are Aeneas, but wild words do not frighten me. It is the gods cause me to fear, the gods and the enmity of Jupiter. He no more, but looked round and saw a huge rock, a huge ancient rock which happened to be lying on the plain, a 900 stone put there to settle a dispute about land. 12 picked men like those the earth now produces could scarcely lift it up onto their shoulders. But he caught it up in his trembling hands, and, rising to his full height and running its speed, he going. Is its own not go when we on are hurled it at his enemy? But he had no sense of running, or of lifting, or moving the huge rock. His knees gave way. Blood chilled and froze, and the stone rolled away under impetus over the open ground between them. But it did the whole way, and it did not strike its target. Just as are asleep, when in the weariness of night rest lies heavy. 910 eyes. We dream we are trying desperately to run further, and not succeeding, till we fall exhausted in the middle of our efforts. The tongue is useless. The strength we know we have fails our was dread and death to drive it. Body, we have no voice, no words to obey our will. So it with Turnus. Wherever his courage sought a way, the goddess barred his progress. During these moments, the thoughts whirled in his brain. He gazed at the Rutulians, the city. He faltered with fear. He began to tremble at the that was upon him. He could see nowhere to run, no way come at his enemy, no chariot anywhere, no sister too. 920 As he faltered, the deadly spear of Aeneas flashed. His eyes all as never so had picked the spot, and he threw from long range with weight behind the throw. Stones hurled by siege artillery roar like this. The crash of the bursting thunderbolt is not loud. Like a dark whirlwind it flew, carrying death and destruction and whistling down. Rutulian's mountain, there with it, piercing the outer rings of the sevenfold shield, laying open the lower rim of the breastplate. It went through the middle of the thigh. When the blow struck, went great Turnus, bending his knee to the ground. The rose with a groan which echoed round the whole, and far and wide the high forests sent back the sound of 930 voices. He lowered his eyes and stretched out his right hand to said, has touch. Anchises my. You defeated not beg as a suppliant. I have brought this upon myself, and for myself I ask nothing. 940 There stood Aeneas, deadly in his armor, rolling his eyes. Words caught, but he checked his hand, hesitating more and more as the of Turnus began to move him, when suddenly his eyes the fatal baldric of the boy Pallas high, on Turnus' shoulder, with the glittering studs he knew so well. Turnus had defeated and wearing his enemy. Reminder wounded him and then killed him, and now he was belt on his shoulder as a battle honor taken from an Aeneas feasted his eyes on the sight of this spoil, this loved, by of his own wild grief. Then, burning with mad passion and terrible in his wrath, he cried, Are you to escape me now, wearing the spoils stripped from the body of those I this wound which I now give? It is Pallas who makes sacrifice of you. It is Pallas who exacts the penalty in your guilty blood. 950 Blazing with rage, he plunged the steel full into his enemy's breast. The limbs of Turnus were dissolved in cold, and his life left him with a groan, fleeing in anger down to the shades. The end. About the author. Virgil, 70 to 19 BCE, known in Latin as Publius Virgilius Maro, was an ancient Roman poet widely regarded as the greatest literary figure of Rome. Born near Mantua in northern Italy, Virgil lived during a transformative period in Roman history, witnessing the transition from the Roman Republic to the rule of Augustus. Educated in rhetoric, philosophy, and literature, Virgil became one of the leading poets of his age. His works combined artistic mastery with profound reflections on history, politics, and the human condition. Before composing the Aeneid, he gained recognition through eclogues and georgics, both of which established his reputation as a poet of exceptional skill. Virgil devoted the final years of his life to writing the Aeneid, a monumental work intended to provide Rome with a national epic comparable to the poems of Homer. Although the poem remained unfinished at the time of his death, it was preserved and published, quickly becoming a central text of Roman education and culture. Throughout the centuries, Virgil's influence extended far beyond the Roman world. His poetry inspired medieval scholars, Renaissance humanists, and countless writers, including Dante Alighieri, who famously chose Virgil as his guide in the Divine Comedy. Today, Virgil is celebrated as one of the greatest poets in literary history. Through the Aeneid, he created a work that continues to inspire readers with its exploration of destiny, leadership, sacrifice, and the enduring struggle to build a future from the ruins of the past. Production credits. This audiobook was produced by Pigeon Publishing House, dedicated to the preservation of timeless literature. Copyright 2026, Pigeon Publishing House. All rights to the narration and audio production are reserved. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution is prohibited. Pigeon Publishing House is an independent label dedicated to public domain works. Public domain text used with attribution. Pigeon Publishing House presented Aeneid. Author, Virgil. Narrated by Henry Wells. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. We hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this audiobook. If anything you heard today helped you, challenged you, or gifted you a useful idea, remember to support us with a 5-star rating, follow the podcast, and leave a comment with your reflection of the day. And if you want to keep growing, we'll be waiting for you in our other compilations. Pigeon Audiobooks, Philosophy, Pigeon Audiobooks, Finance, Pigeon Audiobooks, Classics, and Pigeon Audiobooks, Top 100 Bestsellers. There you'll find a complete library to elevate your mind and your results. See you in the next episode. And never forget, knowledge is the greatest act of rebellion against the system.